T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Kush's Corner on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. We got a good one for you tonight. Chris Rice is joining me doing co-hosting duties, and we are joined tonight by Vin Russo. We have quite the important topics to discuss tonight, primarily the topics of feeding and nutrition of pythons and boas, and then also the topic of establishing the lineages you're working with and how to focus on longevity within your projects. But before we get into the conversation, as always, USARC. So USARC is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to live this lifestyle. Check out usarc.org for all of the information you need to know about the organization. And if you're not already a member, please look into becoming a member of USARC. As a community, we have strength in numbers, and the more people that are behind the cause, the better. And here we are. So thank you to everyone who is already here on the live. Shout out to the comments. If you're here on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. We drop a new podcast every single day of the week here from some of the best hosts in the game, talking about a wide variety of topics within the industry. If you're an audio only kind of person, we are available on all of the major audio platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. A follow and a 5-star review on any of those platforms would be most appreciated. And yeah, that's kind of our general housekeeping to get started. Chris, how's it going, man?
Catch you happens every time. I'm trying to sneak a sip in right before. Yeah. Good, man. How you doing? Good to see you again.
Doing all right. Kind of catching up after the Dallas NARBC weekend. Getting things back in order over here. So it's always fun to, it's always fun to get out and travel, see friends and stuff like that. But then always catching up all the animals when you get back is a little bit, a little bit stressful. So.
No, I can't remember. Did you vend or were you just attending?
No, just attending.
Just attending. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's a show that I'm not 100% sure if I would vend, because Dallas has those weird laws about pythons and stuff like that. I could vend colubrids and whatnot, but and honestly, I don't really have a whole lot that's available right now. But yeah, I mean, I think you can get like special permits or something like that. Or I don't know. I haven't really looked into it, but yeah, the whole thing just seems a little bit strange.
Yeah, it seemed odd, especially because Texas is always known for being pretty open and free with everything. So
that's why I moved here,
Yeah.
But yeah, there are just certain little local areas that have interesting legislation. So kind of the goal, if you're here in Texas, is just to stay away from those areas, and you're good to go. But yeah, man, we got a very exciting episode for everyone tonight. When we were talking about the next show to do, and you brought up Vin's name, I was like, yeah, that's a tremendous idea. And especially with the topics that we wanted to discuss. So I guess for everyone who's watching or listening probably knows of Vin, but if anyone somehow or another doesn't, give him a little bit of an introduction. What should everyone know about Vin Russo?
Well, so he's been doing this for God knows how many years now, 25 years, 30 years, full time. So there's not a whole lot of people that can, make that claim. And
absolutely,
he's established and worked with, it seems like just about every kind of boa constrictor there is out there. And just as, always struck me as somebody that always has a lot of really interesting approaches and methods to the way he goes about doing everything, and is very disciplined and logical with his approach to working with the animals. And I think it's reflected in everything he's done. So yeah, and he's written books. Seems to have done just about all of it. And that's not even I'm not even very familiar with the ball python work, but I know he's established the you know, it was the Russo line, leucisticus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think like you said, most people probably are aware of his work and his longevity. So I'm looking forward to talking with him tonight.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, without further ado, let's bring Vin onto the show. Good evening, Vin. How's it going?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Well, what's up, man?
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here tonight. How are things going up there in New York? We talked a little bit about how the weather's been a little strange lately. It definitely kind of atypical this year, huh?
Yeah, it was a long, cold winter. It's still cold.
Yeah.
It's still cold like right now. So yeah, we're a bit behind. It's usually starts warming up by now, but it's still cold. Still running the heaters and keeping the warehouses warm. So.
Yeah, I mean, last year I feel like I was shipping to New York in like February, even like late January at times.
Yeah.
And I got people who've been waiting for months now. So it definitely is. It's been a weird year. It's been a very weird year, but like we were discussing ahead of time, it just kind of, it's one of those things that the animals will do what they need to when they will. And we can only kind of do so much about what's going on outside. So kind of is what it is there.
Yeah. Well, the animals and the trees. So you look outside, and my in my Facebook page and my Instagram, it'll show me things that happened last year this time or this day. And last year this day, trees are in leaf outside, and they're not yet. So it's like with the trees and the indigenous wildlife know that it's not spring yet, and so do our captive wildlife. They know too, so they're still waiting also.
Yeah,
they're always in tune to what's going on outside, even
Definitely.
when we don't know what's going on.
Yeah, we try to create an environment for them that is conducive of them thriving and doing well indoors, but still they know, they feel that chill that creeps in. It's just a few degrees difference that really can change things for all reptiles, because most of them live near the equator, and it's only a few degrees difference that they feel in the wild compared to northern hemisphere, where it's 30, 40, 50 degrees swings. In the on the equator, it's 4 or 5 degree swings. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that being said, when you approach the cycling of your room, do you ever really try to force the issue with exactly how you want the temperatures to go, or are you really going off of what's going on outside and going with the flow of what nature's given you?
Yeah, I learned a long time ago that it's not economical for me to go against what's going on outside. It's just way too expensive for me.
Sure.
So I used to, in the beginning, I used to try to create a seasonality indoors by trying to, beat the system or fool Mother Nature. Like with the colubrids, I'd tried to put them down earlier and wake them up earlier.
Yeah.
But I've learned over the many years that it doesn't work. No matter what you do to change the temperatures, they still know and feel that chill or, the warm up, whatever it is you're trying to change. So yeah, I'm basically at the mercy of what's going on outdoors. I don't try to unnaturally warm up my building when it's really cold.
Okay.
Simply because it'll cost me a lot of money.
Sure.
Here in New York, it would be ridiculous. I mean,
I'm sure you also then everything's getting dried out that much more too, having to run the heat nonstop.
Exactly. If you're running the heat that much, you're counterproductive because you're just drying the whole place out. It really goes against everything you're trying to do to create a spring environment. You want the humidity to increase. You don't want it to decrease. So for me to heat a building in late winter to try and cheat spring is just foolish. And it's the same with the summer. For me to try and cool it down early is foolish too. So I just go by Mother Nature. Whatever's going on outside is what I do. So every year is just a little different, but it's always within, I'm going to say 4 weeks. It's always within that range,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us, keepers who have been doing it for a much shorter period of time, we think of, okay, this is what worked for me last year or whatever, and I want to try to replicate it exactly the same. I mean, I'm dealing with that personally right now of having a later season like everyone else is, and just kind of being freaked out at times of like, I cycled everything the same way last year, the same dates and everything, and why is everyone going so much later? And I guess, is that just something you get used to over time of just learning that the animals will just do what they will when they feel like doing it?
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, I've got some races of snakes. For example, I have some Russian black sand boas.
Okay.
Now they're more of a northern climate, so they chill down. But the weirdest thing is, one female that I have has given birth every year for the last 5 years on June 24th. No deviation, no matter what I do.
That's incredible.
And this year she's on pace for the same thing. I put them together the same time, thinking, "Oh, they're not going to breed. It's still too cool." They were breeding, and so they breed like now, the end of March and the beginning of April, and she gives birth June 24th.
It's a rebel, man.
You can set your calendar to it. But then I've got boas that they could be a month apart, and some pythons too. They can be a month apart from year to year.
Yeah. Do you see more deviation from year to year with boas or pythons overall?
More with boas. The pythons are pretty close.
They're just not as affected by the outward conditions, or just for whatever reason they're more consistent.
I think the whole egg thing is gives them the females a shorter maternal time. So compared to boas where they're carrying them the whole time.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that could extend, like a cooler spring could extend the gestation a tiny bit. So yeah, it depends.
Yeah, I have to get that. So, question that I have for you: females that seem to, at least for me, it seems like every year I have like a female or two that just breeds at a completely different random time compared to the rest of everything that I have going. Do you have any insight as to why that happens? Why this one female got that cycle kicked off 3 months early or 2 months later than everyone else did?
Yeah, I've had that with green tree pythons. I'll have females that will go completely different time of year compared to others, and there's multiple compensating factors. One is food. One female may be on a food cycle and you don't even know it, but you're feeding her maybe a little more, or her food reaction is more, so you might give her another item. You might trick her, or not trick her, but put her into egg production by that. The other one is depending on where they've come from in the wild. So, for example, and I use green tree pythons as an example, is that we now know there's 3 different species of green tree pythons, and I definitely have green tree pythons that are spring breeders, and I have green tree pythons that are fall breeders. Okay. So it could be something to do with that too. I mean, I know you're doing a lot of scrubs. Scrubs range from, the range is just as larger than green trees. So who knows where some of those animals evolved. They might have a fall pattern or a spring pattern. You don't know. You have to figure it out. Yeah. So keep that in mind. And when you have females that are doing different things than the rest, or if they're all the same species, I would say it's something to do with food. Could be that they're on a bottom rack where it might get a little cooler, faster. Who knows?
Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed, and I remember you saying that in an episode one time. I think it was regards to slugs, where just even within one rack or stack of cages, there can be a surprising, seemingly subtle variation on that cage, but it's enough to do something different, and to either it's a little cooler, or a little too hot, and so I'm trying to pay more attention to that. I've definitely picked that up with a few cages where I've got to be a little more on top of it, dump the water out to keep the humidity up, or do something to get that where it needs to be. or make some adjustments for temperature. So yeah, that it seems like that could affect, that in combination with you're not realizing, oh, I've been giving her, a little larger meals than I thought every single time for the last few months. So maybe that's a little bit more of a boost.
Right. And a lot of people don't realize that these tropical animals, like I was saying earlier, just a few degrees can make a difference. It also could be that, the temperature swing. So, for example, maybe you have a heat source that's on in the day and it turns off at night. Maybe you have lights. I don't know. Everybody's different. But once you give a female that up and down of temperatures, the day to night, that could kick them into gear pretty easily, and a lot of guys don't realize they're even doing it. And like I said, a snake could be on a lower cage, a lower part of a rack, whatever it may be. You might have heat that's on a timer. You might have heat that the building is warmer in the day because the sun is out. And once a female starts feeling that temperature swing up and down, that's usually an initial way to kick them in to egg production. So you could be inadvertently putting females into production and not even knowing what's going on. So
yeah, fair enough.
You gotta, I tell people all the time, you gotta watch your animals. You gotta be cognizant of everything that's going on. I walk around with a temperature gun and I'm always temperature gauging things, even though the gun's not accurate. No temperature guns are very accurate. They're still accurate within a few degrees, though.
Yeah.
So
enough to give you an idea of changes, at least.
Exactly. I'll point to them on the snake. I'll point to the hot spot. I'll point to the snake itself. I'll point to the cooler spot, just to give myself an idea of what's going on in a rack, in a row, whatever it may be, from top to bottom. See the difference, and that's something for somebody that's a beginner, and for me who's been doing it their whole lives.
Yeah.
Something you really should do all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely run into that where I've neglected to check on the temperatures in a particular cage, and I'm like, man, I just wasted an entire year of trying to breed this snake because I just didn't pay close enough attention to what was going on in that cage.
Right.
That can do you in. So a question I had kind of in this general vicinity. Let's say, I guess I'll give an example of something that happened with me. I was just starting to cool down my main breeder room, and one female out of the whole group was really rocking developing follicles right as soon as that cool down starts. How would you approach kind of the management of that female? If I'm cooling down, I'm cutting everyone off of food, what would you just be like, all right, she doesn't cool down this year, she's going now, let's get the heat to her, let's get food to her? How would you approach handling that girl at that time?
It depends on what it is. Is it a boa or a python?
Well, python in my instance.
If it's a python, especially a scrub,
yeah,
I would keep the heat on in the day and let it get cool at night.
Okay.
And make sure there's a male in there, and breeding.
Yeah.
That's one of the tricks to those scrubs. I used to do them years ago.
Okay.
They were very predictable for me. I think a lot of people just feed those too much.
Yeah.
And I think that they also keep them too hot.
Yeah. Well, what were the parameters you were keeping yours at?
It was in the heat of the summer, they were 80, 85 ambient with a hot spot that they can get to of 90, 92. Some of them didn't really go to it. But in the winter, it was 70 at night, 68, 70 at night. And the same temperatures in the day, 80, 88 to 90 in the day to get to, not the whole cage.
Sure.
And I would give them that up and down, that day, night temperature swing. That's usually what does it for scrubs. I mean, just think about it. Where they come from, it's very humid all the time. So they really don't have that much of a dry season.
Right.
You don't want to keep them soaking wet, though, in the middle of the winter. Because, those snakes can find a hollow tree where it's bone dry.
Sure.
but you want to give them humidity in the air,
Yeah, for sure.
and you really want to give them those temperature swings, that up and down. That usually that's what does the trick for them.
Okay.
That always seems that those night drops always seem to really trigger a lot of movement and activity in general. You know, with at least with my chondros and emeralds, I'm sure it's
Oh yeah,
probably across the board. It's like everything's up and moving, and they're excited. You know what I mean? They're definitely stimulated by those temperature drops, and it's funny because I remember for years when I was younger, it was always everybody was always so scared to drop the temperatures on anything.
right.
But you know, it's like, oh, don't go below 78. Don't go. You know, everything's just it's like this little strict 5-degree window. You can't ever move the snakes outside of that. But I feel like you know, that's when all the activity starts, when you start actually giving them a little bit of a drop.
And you know, every rainforest I've ever been to in the whole world has been pretty cool at night. Every
I
one
would
of them.
imagine so. Yeah.
And I've been to a lot of places, and I've been to places in their what they call rainy season, their dry season. Like even when I was in Ecuador and Peru, I was there for the dry season and a rainy season, and I didn't see much of a difference, to be honest with you. It still rained every day, even in the dry season. It just rained all the time in the wet season, but you know, it was cooler at night. One night we measured 59 degrees Fahrenheit in the Amazon basin.
Wow. Yeah.
And in the day, it was 85, almost 90 when the sun was out, when it wasn't raining.
Yeah.
And that's what gets things basking. You know, that's when you'd start seeing things basking.
Yeah, they're taking advantage of that little shorter time, you know.
And they're sucking up that sun. Like, you know, think of the scales on a python or a boa. They're like little solar panels. They're just sucking up heat, which you cannot duplicate in captivity. You can't, unless you're going to put them outside in the sun. But it's hard to duplicate that, because in the wild they can just retreat and get out of the sun completely, you know. So but I truly believe that it's those temperature swings that put those, especially pythons, into gear, kick them into gear.
Yeah, that sun stuff. I the way I keep my emeralds in the back room here, it's definitely not as, you know, it's not a replica of the outdoors, but it's been interesting to observe the way they use the sun that comes through the window. Even it being filtered through the window like that, they go and the gravid females will bask just for, you know, a couple of hours and then retreat, you know, and they never do that for the rest of the year. They almost never, even when they eat a meal, they rarely choose to actually go and utilize that sunspot that forms, you know, just for a few hours. But man, as soon as they're gravid and they've had the post-ovulation shed, they start doing that, you know, almost every single day. And it's been cool to watch them do a little bit of the cryptic basking as well. And it's like you describe, it's like a solar panel. They just charge up, shift off, and then they just sit there nice and tight and look content for the rest of the day.
I mean, think about it. They can bask in the real sunlight for literally an hour and get their core temperature up fast.
Yeah.
You know, but in captivity it would take a lot longer. And for example, I know people are going to be pissed at me for this, but I don't believe in those heat panel things, man. I do not. I do not believe that there's anything that they duplicate whatsoever from the wild.
Yeah.
You know, they don't duplicate the sun in any way. They just dry shit out and, you know, dry the air out, especially. There's no light emitting from them, so the snake has no idea, oh, go over here, you know. So I use on most of my pythons little light bulbs just to kick on for a few hours a day, and they use them like a little solar panel. They get under them, they cook up a bit, and then they move over, you know. And then when I realize how much time they're spending, then I'll only leave that light on for a few hours a day.
So that's what I was curious about. I would imagine it's probably pretty consistent across a lot of species. So do you observe them bask for much more than 2 hours at a time ever?
Exactly. That's about it. A few hours. That's all they need.
Yeah.
You know, they're not basking all day. If they're basking all day long, they're not warm enough.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
That's
especially if they're gravid, you know, that's when they need it the most. In the summer, when they're not gravid, I don't give them any basking spots, the pythons. I don't give them any basking spots at all. So it's all changed around, and it's all based on what I see them doing, you know.
Yeah, I noticed a huge difference. I've mentioned this before, but when the first 2 years that I bred the emeralds, I was using ultratherm heat mats on the outside of the cage. I had one on the side of the cage and one on the top. And that female was just butted up against the corner, you know, and she was just basically butted up all day trying to get warm enough.
Yeah.
And it was such a huge difference between when I set them up in the back room and just let the sunlight and give them a little basking spot for a few hours. And then they don't, like I said, they rarely ever choose to use it until they're gravid. And I don't think to this day, I don't think I've seen a male do it even once.
Right.
They just don't see
don't even bother.
Yeah, the ambient warmth seems to be enough, and that natural fluctuation of it, you know, rising and fluctuating a bit throughout the day seems to be what they want, you know.
Yep.
So it's been interesting to observe that, but yeah, I'm not into the heat panels as well. I had a couple of old Neodeshes that had them at first, and they were okay, but it was the same thing. I was struggling with dry sheds and just dried out cages all the time. I'm like, everybody tells you, you know, Florida's so easy, it should be a breeze, but I'm like, well, I'm still getting fucking stock sheds in these cages with these, and spraying them too much and doing shit wrong, you know.
That heat panel is sending down infrared heat, and it's basically baking their skin onto their bodies. You can't get it off. That, you know, like they can't even
much more challenging, it seems like.
Yeah. So again, it works for some people, but for me, I was just like, I would never use those things.
Yeah, I took the dive into them before I really knew better. So I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm stuck with these thousands upon thousands of dollars of heat panels that I've spent money on. But yeah, oftentimes I'm like, man, I really wish I had just done light bulbs in these cages and just kept it simple. Like having to.
But you're learning to work with it. I mean, it's you're
yeah, for sure. But like having to like dial in individual cages, it's just like, you know, all the it's frustrating.
I think the biggest mistake people make with those heat panels is that they use them, for example, with tree pythons, they're using them to keep the cage at 84 degrees. When the best way to do it is just to have them in a room that's 84 degrees.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's that simple.
Yeah.
And, you know, to get, for me, I put flex watt on the bottom of my chondros because that flex watt heats up and generates steam. Because the substrates are always wet. I always use either puppy pads or just water. And it generates steam. When you're in a rainforest, there's steam everywhere because the ground is being heated from the sun, and that mud and earth is just steaming up all day and night. So those snakes are getting that steam heat from the ground up, not from the sky down. You know?
Yeah, because they're hanging out in the shade as much as possible,
right?
You know, unless they're going out of their way to bask.
Yeah, tree pythons, scrubs, they're not. They're basking when they ate a big meal, or they're developing eggs and cooking eggs. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, so to try to set their temperature with a hot rock, you know, to heat the whole cage, to me, and again. This is just my opinion. I know there's people out there that are cringing. They're like, Jesus Christ, I have all these heat panels, and now Vin told me I
know Ryan Young's probably loving this if he's watching it. He hates them.
Ryan using the heat panels?
Ryan calls them, I think he calls them the bacon makers. No, he hates them.
He agrees with
me. He rags on them every chance he gets, so it's always funny.
I'm glad because, you know, I look at Ryan as a guy who knows what he's doing too. So at least don't think I'm a clown now, you know. Because I get so many people that tell me, no, you're wrong, then.
Well, it's like anything. You're not saying literally that this never can work and nobody's ever having success with them, because obviously people are. It's just that it's the differences in the approach and the differences in how it can work in different rooms and everything. And,
right.
And the kind of fundamental approach of them.
It goes to show you that there's many different ways of breeding snakes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, specifically pythons and boas. There's many. I know people that are successful doing the complete opposite of what I do. You know, so I'm never going to say, "Oh, they're wrong." They're not. That just doesn't. Those methods don't work for me. You know.
Yeah.
That's one thing and I know we had wanted to talk about some of the feeding stuff. That you mentioning that about how the opposite kind of approach can work. I've noticed something interesting with food cycling, in that you get people that food cycle females, and I believe, and you can correct me here if I'm wrong, when you generally feed cycle or food cycle most of your snakes, you have a tendency to feed them heavy, then fast them, and then they don't eat again until they either deliver babies or drop eggs. Is that correct?
Depends on what they are, yeah. But
But
boas,
that's a kind of general approach.
yeah, that you know, I feed them. I give them a feeding season and a non-feeding season. It's that simple, you know.
Yeah.
In the wild, they do the same thing. They're not eating all year round. They're really not.
No, that's something I definitely learned, like getting back into keeping. That was one of the hardest things that I had to kind of unlearn from the past, was the every single snake eats once a week all year, and there's no exceptions to that.
Right.
So learning to just feed, basically learning to feed less and less and less over time, and really kind of trying to as much as possible calculate when to give them a good meal, and when to just give them a break, you know what I mean, based on how they're acting and what they're doing, has been interesting. But with regards to the food cycling in particular, what I've noticed was interesting is, like, I take kind of the opposite approach, in that I fast them first with my emeralds and chondros, and then feed them heavy when they're actively breeding. But it seems like either way you go, they need that. It's that difference, you know what I mean? That they need that trigger of no food for a while, and then, you know, heavy food for a while.
Yeah, either way works, and you're proof. I mean, you do it. Your method works well on Amazon basin creatures, whether they're a boa constrictor or an emerald tree boa. That's most likely what's happening in the wild.
Yeah.
You know, they have a dry season, a long dry season. It could be a little cooler. It could be a little drier. It could be a little hotter. Who knows? Then they go into a season where it's hotter and more humid, and there's an abundance of food. And then they're gorging themselves. You know, anacondas are a perfect example, especially like in the Pantanal, where it's dry and the mud is cracking, and they're just hiding in the mud somewhere for months.
Yeah.
And then the rains come, and they come out, and they're eating capybaras and ducks and tapirs, you know, eating giant meals. And they may eat, no joke, they may eat 2 giant meals, maybe even 1. It'll be just enough to put them over the top and reproduce that year. And then there'll be 10 males on them, you know.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with those big retics, like the big Sulawesi retic. It may not eat for months, and then it eats a pig, and then it breeds and lays 50 eggs, you know.
Yeah.
I truly believe that people feed their animals way too much. Way too much.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with that. I mean, it's, you know, we kind of should know by now, at least with boas and pythons, that obviously colubrids are different. They you know, their metabolism's different, but we should know by now that these things are designed to take occasional meals, usually pretty large ones in the wild, and then that's it. And they, you know, who knows how some of them might only get, literally, like you said, 2-3 meals in a year.
Right.
In some cases.
Colubrids are no different than pythons and boas, in that their cold dry spell is obviously hibernation or estivation, whatever you want to call it.
True.
And they're not eating for months and months and months and months, especially northern climate. Think about a bull snake that lives in Illinois. You know, it's probably hibernating 5 months.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you were up there, right, Stephen? I mean, you lived up that way.
Yep. Yeah, I was in Chicago.
Yeah. So a bull snake, the time that a bull snake could feed and digest is probably 2 months. And they try to gorge themselves. They probably try to eat as many squirrels or rats, whatever they can find. And it's usually just enough meals to have them go into egg production. They'll lay eggs, and they might eat 1 or 2 meals and then hibernate again, you know? And I think boas and pythons are very similar. Again, depends on where, and because the range of pythons is tremendous, and the range of boas is tremendous. So they're all very different. So that's why I think it's very easy to come up with ways to find out how to breed them. There's multiple ways of breeding pythons and boas.
Sure.
It just depends on what works best in your environment that you've created in your demographic.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's that simple.
Would you say, one thing I was wondering about, what would your opinion be with the difference between boas and pythons versus colubrid and feeding? Do you think colubrids naturally have a tendency when they're doing that, when they're in that kind of gorging stage of the year? Do you think they're consuming a lot of smaller prey items more often? And they seem to always have a faster digestion overall compared to a boa or a python. But, whereas boas and pythons, I would assume, at least with the adults, are having a tendency to eat, larger prey items.
Yeah, think about where temperate climate colubrids come from. Everything is waking up at the same time.
Yeah.
The mice and the birds are reproducing at the same time. So a colubrid, whether it be a rat snake or a king snake, they're eating all the baby mice in the nest they find.
Yeah.
So they'll eat them all.
True. Yeah.
They'll find a bird nest and eat all the eggs or all the babies. A friend of mine had found an indigo snake once that puked up like 20 baby turtles.
That's crazy.
So, they find a nest and they eat them all.
Yeah.
And that's feast or famine, and they have to do that. It's like hognose snakes in the plains, whether they live near vernal ponds. If they live near vernal ponds, they're eating every frog or tadpole they can get their lips on.
Yeah.
And think about it. They can bask in the sun and get their body temperature up to 110 degrees and digest a frog real fast and eat another one that day.
Yeah.
Sure.
So these are things that people are not cognizant of when they buy a reptile or they want to breed reptiles. They don't understand. Me as a kid, I knew these things because I would find these snakes and see what they did in the wild. I would find eastern hognose snakes or black racers or black rat snakes. And, for example, when I was a kid, I found a black rat snake that was eating a squirrel. And I was like, that's a pretty big meal, Yeah. And I'm sure it was fine. I didn't try to catch it, but that was the extreme end of the spectrum for a colubrid. When they get big enough, they may have to eat one or two squirrels. Same with up here we have timber rattlesnakes in upstate New York. We've gone just to observe them in the wild, and we'll see them grab a squirrel, and it'll be like late April, which is still a little cool at night here. But some of those timber rattlesnakes are jet black, and they'll eat a squirrel, bask in the sun, digest it, and then go down underground overnight and come out again the next day. So they may have just a short window of opportunity to feed like that. And what does this have to do with boas and pythons? All snakes evolved from a common ancestor. They all have a similar way of living,
Sure.
So these are things that I used in coming up with ways to breed snakes, just understanding that.
What, on the flip side of what you're saying, seeing a big meal for a black rat, I observed an adult black racer when I was a kid in tall grass at this lake that we had a drought, and it was really, really way lower than usual. So we had this tall grass, and I saw an adult racer going through, and I just instead of trying to catch it, I just stood and watched it, and I saw it lunge, and I'm like, but I didn't see anything that it lunged at. I just saw it lunge. I'm like, what the hell is it doing? So I kind of got a little closer and watched. It was picking locusts, just one by one. It was grabbing adult,
Cool.
decent sized locusts. Grabbed like 4 or 5 of them in a row. I had no idea it would even eat them. It was like a little snack. You would never think it would eat them, but it was just there. It was just chowing down on them. It was pretty cool to see that.
Yeah.
And it gives you an idea. Yeah, they're opportunistic. They're going to do what they got to do.
Say that. They're all opportunistic feeders. Whatever's there, they're going to eat it. So, to answer your question, is like, are colubrids eating lots of little things? Yes and no. If they can eat a whole mouse nest, they'll eat it.
Yeah.
If they find the pregnant mouse or a pregnant rat, they'll eat that. You know,
Yeah, just
they'll
eat whatever the hell, whatever. Yeah.
And I believe pythons and boas are the same way. I believe that, you know, like you take, for example, those island type snakes, the croquets, the Cape cockers, the Korner islands, the pearl islands. They eat twice a year, basically. That's when migratory birds are heading south, and then when the migratory birds are heading north.
Sure.
So they stop over on these islands, and they will eat as many as they can. Yeah.
Yeah. And how long with those? Because I remember hearing about those. How long do they generally go in between those little? Isn't it just a few weeks twice a year? That if I remember correctly,
it's like 6 months in between.
Oh no, I meant like they have just a few weeks to feed, basically.
Oh yeah,
and then
it may be 6 weeks of birds flying, dropping off, you know, and stopping on those islands to get a drink of water from a leaf, you know, a fresh drink of water from a leaf. Or try to get seeds from a leaf or fruit. Like usually there's fig, you know, ficus trees on those islands. So yeah, maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks of eating, and they're done. You know.
Talk about patience. I always it's like we're lucky we it's so easy for us to acquire our food. Imagine having to wait around for 6 months. Just like shit, man. I got 6 weeks to get it all done.
I gave a friend of mine a pair of croquet boas years ago, and he saw a picture I posted last year of a gravid one where my hand is over and covering the whole thing. Like the whole boa could fit on a dinner plate, basically. And he messages me. He's like, you know, that's the snakes I got from you are so much bigger than that, and I barely feed them. I'm like, well, what are you feeding them? It's like, well, they're eating, you know, a rat every 2 to 3 weeks. I'm like, well, all year round? He's like, yeah. So I said, even if it was every 3 weeks, what is that? That's like 20-something meals a year.
Yeah.
I said, these snakes are eating 6 or 8 meals a year, you know? And that's it. They're just having them more closely.
And reproducing.
And having babies.
That,
no problem.
From that.
You know, you can. I sold a Tarumara boa to a guy at White Plains, and he showed me pictures of it like 3 or 4 years later, and it was this. It looked like a blood python. It was this short and stubby, fat.
Yeah.
Like Jesus.
That
Christ,
sausage pinhead look. Yeah, I've seen those.
It's like, I only feed it once every 2 weeks. I'm like, I'm feeding it as much as it can eat every 2 weeks. You know, for a whole year. That's what does that come out to?
26 meals.
26 good sized meals for a snake that in the wild might have 6 meals. You know?
Yeah. No, I mean, so I guess if you're analyzing this wild data of what you're seeing, do you apply that to what you're doing to a T? Or are you like, okay, I have to adjust to my captive setting a little bit? So how do you approach that?
No, I do exactly what I think they do in the wild. Okay. And I've even had people message me saying they'll say, I posted a picture of a gravid Suriname boa a couple of years ago. That was pretty small too. I mean, probably 4 feet. And I saw all these comments like, Vin doesn't know what he's doing. Those snakes are malnourished. He's what they say, it's animal neglect and, you know, all this stupid shit. And meanwhile, boas don't reproduce when they're thin, you know, or neglected, or underfed, or, you know, stunted is another word they use. And that's a stunted boa and it'll never grow. You know, meanwhile, that little tiny 4-foot Suriname gave birth to like 6 babies. 2 years later, she's 6 feet long and she had 14 babies. So it's like, that's not stunted. That's what happens in the wild. You know,
normal growth.
Yeah, a crocodile that's 20 feet long, most likely reproduced at like 10 feet at one point in its life. You know,
and it's been growing slow.
It's just growing.
For a long time.
80 years old. Yeah,
it wasn't 15 foot in the first year.
Right.
That's something I really don't understand, how people in this hobby don't grasp the concept that reproductive size and full grown size are not the same thing.
Right.
Like, I mean, an animal will be like the examples you were giving, like literally twice as big when it's in its final form as it was when it had its first clutch or litter. Why do you think there's such a misnomer around the hobby about that?
I don't know. I think because people, when they read books and the books say things like, Burmese pythons get 20 feet long. And they're like, oh, it's got to be 20 feet long to breed,
Yeah.
Or Suriname boa can get 10 feet long, which is pretty uncommon. And everything's, all Suriname boas are 10 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Oh, when I was younger, I always assumed they were all going to be,
Yeah.
all adult boas were going to be 10, 12, 13 feet. And then it's like, no, hardly any of them are.
I mean, to me, a 10-foot boa is like finding a 30-foot retic,
Yeah.
10-foot boa is a giant boa. And you'll hear, everybody will have a story. Oh, I knew a guy who had a 10-foot boa. Maybe.
6.5 feet,
Yeah, if you measured it, was it really 10 feet? Yeah. I mean, I've seen...
That's like the 3-foot corn snake in the yard that's
Right.
that's 6 feet. You know what I mean?
Right. I've seen Surinams that were 10 feet. I have. I've seen Peru boas that were 10 feet. But again, one or two in my whole life of each. So they can get that big, but over many years, I mean, that's an ancient creature. That's like finding a 20-foot crocodile, or like I said, a 30-foot retic.
Yeah. For sure.
It's just not the norm. Can it get that big? Maybe. Will it? Probably not. And here's the thing: if you feed them properly, you're not going to get anywhere near that. You can keep a snake as small as you want, and it'll be very healthy.
Yeah. I mean, there are going to be inevitably some animals that are just genetically going to be giant kind of abnormalities, but like that's a needle in a haystack. That's not every single. That's not like half of them.
Yeah, it's genetics, 100%.
And no matter how little you feed that snake, it's still going to grow to that giant size if it's meant to be that giant size.
Over time, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Eventually. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like you can see that even within a litter. Like I've had a couple of emerald babies that were born last year. That's like, why the hell is this one so much bigger? There's nothing different I've done.
Yeah.
It's just, it seems to assimilate, 100% of every meal or something. It's just, it just seems like it has that kind of predisposition to be a larger animal. And vice versa. I have I have the smallest baby emerald I've probably ever seen that was born here, to where I was worried about it. I was like, I think we talked about this before, Steve, and I was like, I thought it was going to be a terrible feeder and just a little runt, but it's a little badass. It's just tiny.
Yeah. I was talking to Eugene. I went and visited Eugene Bissett recently because he and I have been friends a really long time. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me that, he's got some snakes. He's got a giant colony of ball pythons, giant. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, he's got to determine whether or not, these females that are all in the same rack, same age, are so different in size. And he's like, do I sell off the smaller ones? Do I keep the larger ones? And I was saying to him, I'm into koi. I keep koi. Mm-hmm. I don't breed them, but I keep them. I could breed them, but I'm a snake breeder, not a koi breeder. So that would be like a whole nother thing. But anyway, in Japan, and the reason why I bring this up because I brought it up with Eugene and he was intrigued by it. In Japan, the largest koi are worth the most money because a koi is a colorful carp. Mm-hmm. And carp, as you probably know, get really big. I mean, I think the state record here in New York is like 30 or 40 pounds, but in Europe they catch them 70 pounds carp, And in Japan, to have, to give you a perspective, a 60 or 70 pound carp is probably 36 inches plus or more. In Japan, if you have a 1 meter, which is about 36 inch, 1 meter koi, and it's got perfect color, it's worth a lot of money. I mean, they've sold for $1 million plus.
Yeah.
Now, why are they so expensive? There's multiple reasons. Koi are no different than ball pythons. There's multiple recessive and dominant genes.
Okay.
And they breed the combinations to create, let's say, think of a ball python combination that looks cool, like bumblebee.
Mhm.
It's pastel and spider and normal. Or even a killer bee. It's a super pastel spider.
Yeah.
I'm just using it as an example, not to talk about the wobble head and all the other shit. But you're using 2 traits on that, and in koi it could be 4, 5, 6 traits. And what happens is you have to do a lot of inbreeding and line breeding to get those traits to keep popping up.
Sure.
So over time, you get the results. You get the bumblebee, but they're smaller. They don't get to that big size because there's so many different traits in inbreeding done. So I said to Eugene, did you ever think that maybe after all these years that we've been doing this in ball pythons, that you might be losing the size because there's so many different traits involved now? He's like, wow, that really makes a lot of sense. It could be. I said, but here's the thing. In Japan, every once in a while, there is one of those, we'll call it a bumblebee, that gets a meter.
Yeah.
That's the $1 million koi. It's a meter, and it's got the perfect colors, and it's big and fat, and it's huge. It's reminiscent of the original giant carp. And it might be happening in captivity with things like ball pythons. It could happen in captivity with boas, too. It could happen with colubrids. I know with corn snakes, I used to have corn snakes that laid 30-plus eggs. I don't have anything like that now. Not one. And my corn snakes are multiple traits.
And you think it's because basically, do you think it's that it's like a deleterious effect of the combination of traits, or more so just that those traits, there just didn't happen to be enough animals that were bred during those generations of line breeding that had the size that you wanted?
I think what it boils down to is the first example. I think it's that these anomalies, these deleterious traits, these some of them you would call spontaneous gene mutations. I think they weren't meant to be to begin with, and here we are compounding them.
Sure.
We're adding 4 or 5 of them on top of each other.
Yeah.
They're not reminiscent of what happens in the wild. Did some of them come out of the wild? Yes. A lot of these traits came out of the wild. Mm-hmm. Would they have reproduced and made more just like themselves? We'll never know.
Yeah.
But here we are taking, albino, for example. Albino to me is just a weaker gene. It's just a little weak.
Sure. It's a defect. Yeah.
I've had plenty of albino everything, whether it be a colubrid, a boa, or a python, breed and lay eggs and do fine. But they're just not as prolific as a big normal one, Yeah,
sure.
It's that simple. But then when you compound it by adding albino, clown, hypo, pied, pastel, whatever, you're adding all these genes, enchi, on top of each other to compound it and make all these weird things. You're compounding the weak traits. So it might equate to smaller size.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is my theory,
Yeah.
Guys like Eugene who've been doing this as longer than I have can look back in their records and see exactly who's in the family tree of these animals that may not have gotten as big as he wanted them to. And again, like you were talking about, Chris, it's like you have multiple snakes in a rack. They're all related. They all have the same traits. They're all offered food the same time, the same day, the same hour, year round. And one of them is really big and one of them is really small, and some are somewhere in between, Mm-hmm. Why is that one really big who ate the same amount of meals? And why is that one really small who probably ate almost the same amount of meals? It's genetics. It's that simple.
Yeah. And then there does seem to always be a trend of like the kind of extreme phenotypes that draw people's eyes. A lot of times are, being honest, a lot of times they seem to be weaker animals.
Right.
Right from the start. And so then we're just continuing.
We're coddling them. We're coddling them and making sure they eat and giving pinkies and the exact meal they need, nothing too big, and we're crippling them along to adulthood, and we're breeding them. And then we're getting more of these little handicapped, babies.
Well,
So,
and that was one of the things I was curious about. And I had some notes about this. So, with regards to inbreeding in general, right? So, you've obviously been working with so many species for a long time, and you've no doubt. I mean, you've got to be into how many generations now with some of the boas? 6, 7, 8 generations in, if not longer. I would imagine.
up there, yeah.
Right. So, do you? I guess like with regards to you hear a lot about inbreeding depression is the term you hear people throw around, and I think you look at something like you were talking about some of the island forms of boas earlier, where the majority of these in captivity and on the islands, it's a pretty small gene pool to start with. Correct? It's a pretty limited number of animals that were on that island to begin with, and then when you think of the captive animals that we have, some of these things, there was one shipment of them, maybe 2 shipments, where it was just a few animals, and everything's descended from there, and yet they don't seem to have a lot of these, a lot of real problems from inbreeding. And then in other cases, you might see, like we were talking about with these morphs and the multi-combo morphs, you're seeing, problems, a lot of weak animals and different issues. Is it maybe something that inbreeding is not necessarily inherently wrong and going to cause all these problems, but in the case of these island boas, Mother Nature's kind of weeded out all the bad traits, or the majority of them anyway, so it's just kind of operating as it should, whereas in captivity we're making mistakes left and right, and we're going, oh well, that one's really cool looking, even if it's the weakest thing on earth, we're gonna keep pulling it out. Is that what are your thoughts on that? Am I in the general ballpark, if I'm making sense here?
No, that's exactly what it is, and I even wrote about it in my last book. For example, we'll take for example island boas. I get people to say, then I want an unrelated pair of COCO boas. I'll say, well, the entire bloodline in captivity started from one pair. They're like, oh, I don't want any inbreeding problems. Well, the entire race of COCO boas probably started with maybe one gravid female. Who knows? And what you'd have to keep in mind is, in nature, evolution works in an amazing way. Charles Darwin talks about survival of the fittest, which is the most obvious. But in nature, we'll go back in time 100,000 years or more, and find a boa that ends up on an island, rafts there on a storm, and is genetically isolated because as time goes by, ocean currents change and another boa can't get there. So luckily that snake either was gravid or a few of them landed on this island, and they started their own race, so to speak, unbeknownst to them. They're just a regular snake that came from the mainland, and what happens is over centuries they're genetically isolated from the mainland, and any deleterious traits that may be appealing to humans, which aren't there yet, are eliminated fast.
Yeah, sure.
And you'd think that, oh, well, you're breeding brother, sister, mother, daughter, well, mother to son or father to daughter. Over time, those bad traits are gone, basically. You have snakes that are genetic copies of each other. They're all, genetic copies. The inbreeding, if any, is gone because if it were to occur, it wouldn't proliferate itself. So over time, those animals, and I think I might have brought this example up before in another podcast, but my most prolific snakes are my island type boas. I've got a crawl K. I had a Cape Cocker, a crawl K, and a hog island. Not at the same time, but over time, gave me 7 litters in a row. 7 years in a row. Not every other year, every year, 7 in a row.
Wow.
I have no other boa race that does that.
Interesting.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's crazy.
So it's like, and they're related because my entire Hog Island colony started from a pair of snakes from the Bob Sears, Louis Porres trips, and then a few wild animals that I got later on from another person's trip. So there's basically 2 bloodlines in there, and I kept them separate for a while. Then I mixed them, and all of the snakes are pretty much identical.
Okay.
They are
Cool.
Dog Island boas. And it's the same with the Crawlcays. That whole bloodline started with 2 unrelated animals from the island. So they could have been brother and sister, and nobody even knows.
Sure.
But I've had 0 issues with inbreeding depression with those animals. And then if you want to go further to, say, mainland animals, whether it be, my Brazil boas, I've got a few bloodlines of Brazil boas. All of those lines were started with 1 pair. And I've had 0 inbreeding depression issues with all those animals.
Okay.
And it'll make you think, all right, well, they're mainland animals. They need to be outcrossed. They really don't, because think about when a snake is born in the wild. It lives in an environment that's conducive to it finding food and thriving. So it's not going to leave that little genetically isolated area or population. It's going to most likely stay there. So the chances of it running into a family member are very good. That's why I breed locality boas. They're called locality boas because they came from a specific location, whether we know the exact pinpoint location or within a city that is known on a map. They're from a spot, and they all have very similar attributes.
Okay.
So I'm sure you see it too, Chris, with the emeralds.
Mm-hmm.
Boas that come in some shipments look completely different than boas that came in other shipments.
Yeah.
So those snakes look that way because they were either genetically isolated, or there's a population with that particular look that's conducive to them blending into that particular environment. Just like the K boas. Those Crawl K boas are like a charcoal gray animal. At low tide on those islands, the ground is charcoal gray. You could put one on the ground and walk right by it, and you would not see it. Blends in with the roots of the mangrove trees.
Yeah.
Same with Suriname boas and Peru boas and Brazil boas. They have a very cryptic look to them that might be conducive to a particular rainforest that they're living in, and that's why they have that look. Amarelli, the Bolivian boas, they've got that charcoal gray, at least the ones I have, that charcoal gray background color. And I've seen photos of where they come from in the wild, and the ground is very charcoal gray, Yeah. So as far as inbreeding depression and locality boas, I personally have had 0 issues with every locality race that I have. And going back to what we were talking about before, you're right, Chris. It's us picking these anomalies, we'll say, whether they are a pattern anomaly, a color anomaly, and we're trying to proliferate them and breeding them back to see if we pop it up again. And we're just proliferating the deleterious genes with them. But meanwhile, in the wild type animals, the deleterious traits have been eliminated a long time ago.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was that a long explanation?
I loved it. No, I thought it was good. Yeah. I was going to add one more thing on that. I was going to ask your opinion on. I've always wondered. I think I've asked this before. A couple people with something like Longicauda. And I might be wrong. I don't keep them, so I've just observed them from afar. But doesn't it almost look to it looks to me almost like it almost looks like an IMG mutation popped up in the wild and did like what we're talking about. Like it basically kept proliferating in a region till it became the dominant form. And then that's now what we consider the normal phenotype.
Longicauda 100% is an IMG boa.
Okay.
It's just not the IMG boa that originated from Colombia. Pete Call called them the Azabachi boa when he first found one. It popped up in it popped up in a Colombian Anamathrista Colombian boa litter. It was either a Colombian boa he sold somebody and they bred it, and he saw something dark and he wanted it, he got it back, or he produced it. I forget. It's so long ago, but I remember seeing it in his place when I was there as an adult, all jet black, and showed him pictures of it when it was a baby, and it was just a dark anery boa. So that is Colombian origin IMG, which was again, maybe a spontaneous gene mutation, who knows? But the Longicorda 100% have an IMG. I'll call it an IMG factor,
Yeah.
because they all start light and end up dark, every one of them.
Okay.
And another snake that has an IMG factor is the leopard boa. They have an IMG factor too,
Sure.
because they'll start light, and some of them will turn jet black. And Hans Winter called them SIMG, Sonora IMG. Which again, all three of these traits have nothing to do with each other. I don't know what you'll get when you breed them to. Well, somebody bred an IMG to a Longicorda, I think in Europe, and it was this jet black snake. So they compound each other. Maybe they overlap in a way.
Right. Very cool.
So, but yeah, Longicorda is a wild type IMG. And again, there's pictures in my book of their environment. And in the dry season, it looks like a temperate forest. The trees are leafless and the ground is black.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, we are about at that midway point of the show. So now we're going to head on to our commercial break. But stick around, everybody. Hold tight. We'll be back in a few minutes with the second part of the interview.
Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. Diversity when it comes to a reptile diet, I feel like is so important. So this is why I'm proud to announce today's sponsor, Blake Exotic Feeders over in Florida.
What is up, everybody? Blake here, the owner of Blake's Exotic Feeders. We have all quail available at all times, produced here at my ranch from button day old, from Coturnic day old, all the way to extra large Coturnic quail. If you guys have any questions, DM on Instagram. Appreciate the support, you guys. Make sure you guys hit me up. We have all the quail, like I mentioned, and everything is shipped right here from my house.
If you want the #1 quail sent to your doorstep, and more importantly, fed to your reptile, no better company than to go to than Blake Exotic Feeders. #1 quality in quail, hands down, and I gotta tell you, my reptiles love it just as much. Give me a peace of mind to know that these quail are grown on his property and it's not bought third party. Head over to his website, Blake Exotic Animal Ranch, to place your order, or you could just hit him up directly on Instagram. Let him know that the Trap sent you and he'll take extra good care of you. Thank you so much, Blake, for supporting the Trap, and also thank you so much for sending me top quality homegrown quail for my animals. One of the things I love about being a part of the reptile industry is all the learning, okay? Learning can be fun, and I can prove that to you. Thank you so much to today's sponsor, it's Gary Scavino over at gs.reptiles. I highly recommend you head over to his YouTube channel, follow all this man's content when it comes to learning about rare species of snakes you could be keeping in the hobby, and also just finding out how easy a lot of these rare species of snakes are to keep in general. So thank you so much, Gary Scavino of GS Reptiles. Again, head over to his YouTube channel. Also head over to his Instagram to be on top of all of his current work and be ready for a big year over at GS Reptiles. Thank you so much, Gary, for your ongoing support. I really appreciate it. Choo! Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. Green tree pythons, emerald tree boas, and plenty other arboreal snakes have been quite the popularity here at the Trap Talk Reptile Network, which brings me to today's sponsor, the Reptile Perch. Head over to thereptileperch.com and Reptile Perch on Instagram. See what type of design PVC perch is best for your arboreal reptile. But first and foremost, I would also check out David Brom's Green Tree Python availability on the website. And you can also check out his Instagram just to stay current on any projects or any productions that he posts. Thank you so much, David Broms, for your ongoing support. Looking forward to seeing what you have to show in the 2025 season. Shout out to today's sponsor, and that is the COCO Dude. #1 chipper substrate in the game. Everything you see behind me, all my emerald tree boas, my green tree pythons, are all over that beautiful COCO chip over at COCODude.com. Go to COCODude.com, place your order. I prefer the COCO to go. It's already broken down, less dust, the chunks are perfect. But yes, I like the COCO to go. No matter what your total is in your cart, if you put in TRAPFAM25 in the promo code, you are now going to get 25% off your entire order. Thank you so much, the COCO Dude, for doing that for all my trappers. Again, #1 substrate in the game, less duck sheds, less dust. It's the best place to be, and that's the COCO Dude. Again, COCODude.com, put in promo code TRAPFAM25 and get yourself 25% off the entire order. Thank you so much, COCO Dude. Cheers.
All right, we are back. I want to throw a question in from the chat before we get back into it. It's about Tarumara boas. So the question is, were the Tarumara boas that this Renfro imported the only ones ever brought into the States, or all the current Tarumara descendants of that original group?
Yeah, pretty much. I know Gus got in a pair, and I think a lone male came in afterwards. I'd have to check with my sources, but pretty much the entire bloodline started from the one pair that Gus bred, and I think maybe another guy bred a wild-caught male to one of Gus's offsprings a couple years later. But yeah, they were all, well, just the pair came in, and that was it. So, and again, those boas are from a very genetically isolated canyon.
Yeah, sure.
And they are unique to that area, and they have a very unique look to them. The one thing about them that is very upsetting is there's a lot of imposters out there. There's a lot of people trying to sell animals. They're saying the Tarahumaras, and most of them are not.
Yeah. I mean, how do you combat that in the boa world when the differences are so minimal that you can tell, other hardcore boa people can tell, but new people will have no chance?
Yeah, they don't have any chance. Like, one of my customers recently purchased a pair, and I felt bad that I had to tell them those aren't even close. I mean, you can understand if they were close, but not even close. You know, there's nothing I can do about it, and I kind of gave up because I'm at the point in my life where, you know, I felt like I was Noah for a while. You know, I put together the ark. I have, you know, pairs of all the different localities.
Yeah,
and I try to sell them to people, that like-minded people, but all of them just end up in the wrong hands eventually. Every fucking one of them, and it's so upsetting to me because, you know, here's an example too. I try to sell them as pairs because I want people to buy them as pairs and breed them and keep my ark afloat, you know, so to speak. But it's a catch-22 because people want the smaller snakes as pets.
Yeah.
So, for example, last year I sold a pair of crawl case to somebody, and they tricked me. They're like, "All right, I want a pair." They bought them, and they ended up selling the other one. You know, so then the other one's a single, and then I get people saying, "Hey, Ben, I got this from so and so," and they said they got it from you, and I got the other one, and I'm like, well, it should have been a pair that stayed together. Now they're not. Well, I'll never breed it. Oh, really? But you're going to get rid of it one day, and someone's going to breed it to a mutt and say, look, I have Vin Russo crawl case. You know? Same thing happens with every single race of boa that I create. So I don't want to say I'm giving up because I don't want to give up. And you guys wanted to talk about keeping lines going, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I've been keeping these lines going for 25, 30 years. And no matter what I do to educate people, nobody fucking gives a shit. You know? It's that simple.
Well, I know. I hear you. I can imagine. And I can hear the frustration in your voice. And I can only imagine after this much time how frustrating it's got to be because, it's like all that work that you do can just be undone. And
it can be done in one breeding. Yeah. And it's already being done. You know, I see it every day. I see snakes posted every day. Hog Island boas from Vin Russo. No, they're not.
Yeah.
Not even close. It would be like you're a German Shepherd breeder and you have the best German Shepherds in the country, and some puppy mill guy's like, "Hey, I got, you know, Vin Russo German Shepherds." And you're like, "No, you don't. those are puppy mill mongrels." You know.
Yeah.
So, am I tooting my horn? No, I'm not. But I just feel that
it's what you're doing. Yeah.
I feel after all this time, putting that much time and effort into things, to see them just go to shit is like a stab in the heart. But there's nothing I can do about it. Nothing. So I just let it go. And
other than
only hope other people.
Well, so you do try to you try to help keep educating people and kind of make your point about it. And I think I think people will continue to do it, but it'll probably always be on a smaller scale compared to the all the hybrid stuff. And I don't know how you feel about this. Are you completely anti-hybrid with everything?
Not really.
Did I just kill the? Okay, I think it froze up for a second. I was like, "Damn, I killed the whole conversation."
No. I'm not really. I'm not into.
Vin's like, "Fuck this, I'm out."
He said that
But that's it.
He's done. He's like, "I'm out."
No, I'm not. I'm not anti-hybrid. I mean, hybrids. You know.
Yeah, I'm not 100% either.
Again, Charles Darwin said hybridization is the hybridization was how new species were created in the wild. So it's happening in captivity. Who am I to say, you can't hybridize? People are doing it. They're coming up with some cool stuff. But I truly believe that if you have something from a known place, and someone like me or Gus or, Lloyd Lemke, or, all these pioneers that put this stuff together, if they have snakes with provenance to a particular place, and like I said earlier, we don't know the exact pinpoint location, but we do know that those snakes were picked up somewhere near, whether if it was a city, somewhere in a general vicinity of a rainforest or a river passage, whatever it may be. We know where they came from. To me, it's a waste to mix them into something else. It's just like, why bother?
Yeah.
But if you have something like, I breed leopard boas. They've been mixing other things. I have leopard boas that are pure Sigma, but I have leopard boas that I mixed into salmon hypo many, many years ago, before we knew there was Sigma and Imperator.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, we didn't know exactly where the first leopards came from. It was reported that they were Sonora boas, but there's no proof at all. And all of the original leopard boas that I got, especially the hets, the normals, didn't look anything like Sonora boas I had. So I didn't say to Hans Winter, these aren't Sonoras. I said, yeah, they're Sonoras, but who knows where they're from? They're from another place in the Sonora range,
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is there has been hybridization done and created some pretty cool stuff, specifically whether it be in boas and pythons. And
sure,
I would never say, oh, that's foolish to do. But I will say to take one of, like a Hog Island boa and breed it into, an albino or something, to me, it's just a waste of time.
Yeah.
You can take one from each side and make them the best of what they are, and there'll be far more value than the mix.
Yeah. It just seems like it'd be nice to see an overall kind of, and from my perspective, it does seem like maybe that's a bright side that I'm seeing a little bit, is like it'd be nice to just see more effort to lean towards maintaining both in the hobby, as far as, keep the pure things so that we have pure representations, or as pure as we can, of some of these species and localities. And if you're going to hybridize stuff, that's fine. But just if people would just put effort into labeling things and kind of maintaining it accurately. But that's where you get in. That's where it all starts. Is there's always that financial drive to go, well, let me breed this thing into that, and then claim it's the more expensive thing or the more coveted thing.
Right.
And you can't really undo. There's no stopping that, I guess. But at least trying to get more people to be aware of it and hopefully not practice, or at least think twice before doing that.
Yeah, and the opposite end of the spectrum is that I do run into a lot of people that are really into locality type stuff, who want to proliferate it and keep it going. So they are out there. I guess the one or two or few that try to fuck it up are just, to me, it's disheartening, not even one or two. There's a lot more than that. But I feel there's more people out there that are into it than there are ones that are into screwing it up. So hopefully they'll keep it going. I mean, I've said this before. I'm not doing this forever. I'll do it as long as I can. But you get to a point where you're just like, if I do this enough and not enough people give a shit, why am I bothering? So like I said, there's still people that care, so I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm going to keep the lines pure as long as I can. You know, for example, the Hog Island boa line I have goes back to like the 80s. You know,
Yeah, that's incredible.
my Brazil boas from Lloyd Lemke go back to 1987. I remember the year we got them in from Lloyd.
Wow.
The Longicarda we got in 1988.
And wasn't that just a few shipments too, or was it one shipment or two? Like it
was
just one shipment.
One shipment, and I think another one came in later on. I think Crutchfield got some in later on because I ended up buying some from him back in, I guess it was mid to late 90s. I forget the exact date, but you know, maybe 2 or 3 shipments of Longicarda came in into the country, and that's it, because you can't just go to that particular part of the world and pick up snakes and ship them back. It's right on the border of Peru and Ecuador, and from what I gathered back in the 80s, it was a disputed part of Peru that Ecuador said was theirs, and Peru said no, it's ours. So the first shipment that came in didn't have the proper paperwork, and it was I guess confiscated and ended up in a zoo, and I ended up getting some that way. So
okay.
But yeah, like, you know, I have that bloodline still. I have that exact bloodline. Like,
so that's something I was in terms of keeping bloodlines up like that. Like what do you feel were some of the important decisions you made to properly maintain that, as far as, you know, do you strive to always hold a certain number of animals back? Do you, you know, focus on size, vigor, you know, only color? What are your kind of your thoughts on that, as far as what's worked and what you prioritized when trying to maintain these lines?
Well, when the animals first came into the country, I know exactly what they look like because I have photographs of them. And what I tried doing, it was just proliferating that exact look, you know. So, for example, with the Longicarda, some of them were lighter when I first started breeding them, and some were darker. And so I kept some of the light ones just to see what they would look like, and some of the dark ones to see what they would look like. And all of them ended up being pretty dark. So no matter what I did, I mean, some were black and gold, some were almost anerythristic, and they probably were anerythristic and are. Yeah. Because I know people have popped up anerythristics from my line. Same with that Zero, the patternless one that came from my line. They first popped up, I think, in either France or Germany from snakes I shipped over there years and years ago.
Well, it seems to pop up in a lot of boas, because I remember even when I used to work at a wholesaler back in the day, I picked out a bunch of Aneries and random Colombian boa shipments and Central American boa shipments. It seems like, and it makes sense. It kind of isn't too drastic of a change, you know?
Right. So I tried to keep that wild type look, you know? And I always would breed snakes that looked the opposite of each other.
Okay.
I didn't try to breed like snakes. You know, like if I had a black and gold one, I wouldn't breed it to a black and blue one, you know. I mean, I would breed it to a black. I wouldn't breed them to each other. I wouldn't breed black and gold and black and gold. So if I had a light one, I'd breed, as an adult, I'd breed it with a dark one, just to create the randomness of what would happen in the wild. Yeah, you know, because you can completely change the look of a snake in a few generations. It almost happened with hogs. I remember hogs were really speckless and like really bright and orangey because people were picking the lightest ones with no speckles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did the opposite. You know, I did the most speckled ones.
Well, that's an interesting, that's why I was really interested to hear your thoughts on that, because that's something I've been thinking of in terms of trying to establish emeralds. Like, I want to do some of the, you know, extreme phenotypes just like anybody else, but I also am interested, if as much as possible, in trying to maintain just some wild looking ones, the ones that just look like what I've always seen with the Northerns coming out, which aren't always necessarily everybody's favorites, but I always feel like they should still be around. And that makes sense. It just basically put random ones together every now and again and let some kind of random shit pop out from that, and you'll get some of the kind of, you know, you'll get an average of different some variability within those litters, and that's an interesting way to maintain it, is just kind of continue that thought process from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for example, my Brazil boas, they don't have very long red tails. They have shorter red tails. And the very first ones I got in looked exactly like that, the shorter red tails. But now they've produced babies with longer red tails. So if I really wanted to, I can pick out all the ones with bigger red tails and breed them to each other and start increasing the red tail part of it, which is commercially a better snake to have. But it doesn't represent what those animals look like when they first came in the wild from Lloyd Lemke,
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, for me, it's a waste to change that. It's just my opinion. I mean, somebody can do whatever they want with those things later on, and after I'm gone, who knows what'll happen to them. But
yeah.
And the most important part of creating, well, not creating, but keeping your own line is time. This is an art form that has, many dimensions, and one of them is time, which is something a lot of people don't have, or aren't disciplined enough to do.
Right.
So
and 20 years ahead of where they are at the current moment.
Right.
Maybe like 2 weeks ahead. Yeah.
Right. They're thinking about next year. What am I going to breed to? What am I going to get? Or, so that's why a lot of these things almost were lost to culture, basically. I mean, and again, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I think the Hog Island boa would have been lost to culture if I hadn't kept a pure line since 1987.
For sure.
Yeah.
You know?
When did they because I feel like I remember those first few expos that I was going to, the first few Daytona shows. I feel like they were, now I don't know how many of them were pure or anything, but I feel like they were kind of hot. Was that around a period where they were a little bit hot, like people were wanting them?
What year was that?
It was like 90, oh yeah, I should give you a reference. It was like 94, 95, 96. Yeah, just throw it out.
You know what?
You should know exactly how
they were always pretty hot, They were never cold, so to speak. They were always, there's always a demand for them. And I think that's what created the issue,
Yeah, sure.
And it didn't help that they started mixing them into hypo and calling them hypo hogs.
Yeah.
Because the byproducts from that are not hypo could easily pass for a hog,
Sure.
So it just diluted the lines. And again, people, since they are popular and they're beautiful snakes, they were bred to a point where they became cheap. And that was, I'm going to say, sometime in the late 90s.
Okay.
$75, $100. Now, most people would say, oh, I'm not doing those anymore. They're too cheap now, and I'll buy no boas,
Yeah.
So stupid people like me were like, well, I really like them, so I'm just going to keep them going,
Even the pures were that cheap, not just the Colombian hybrids.
Right. There was plenty of pure ones, because think about it, when they were coming into the country in the 80s and early 90s, mostly late 80s, mid to late 80s, they came in by the thousands. There was a lot of them that came in.
Okay.
So there were a lot of them.
Okay.
And again, it was the same thing. People were feeding them and getting them bigger and saying, and then some people like, oh, are those pure? They're really big. Well, they fed them too much. It was that simple.
Yeah.
And then some were mixed into other things, and then they got even bigger. So the whole line got diluted big time, So to find real ones is pretty difficult.
Sure.
Because most people don't have the provenance to say, oh, these are from this. I do, because I got them, and I never mixed them into anything other than themselves. So it's the time,
Yeah.
keeping things going this whole amount of time and not losing interest is the thing. And that's why I feel that if somebody's going to buy a pair of these snakes from me, regardless of what the locality is, keep the pair together. If you're going to sell them as a pair with the paperwork that says I got them from Vin, because I give people an invoice that says from Vin, Cutting Edge Herp, with their little, number on them, VR number. Keep them together, keep them with the paperwork, and give them to somebody who gives a shit, who's going to keep them going and maybe breed them too.
Yeah.
But again, that doesn't happen. They get separated. They end up at a show. Somebody sells it for half of what it's worth to a kid who then emails me, Vin, I found a Hog Island boa at a reptile show, and I really want another one. Will you sell me one? And I'm like, no. And it kind of shoots me in the foot because I lose a lot of business that way.
Yeah.
Because if I was to sell them as singles, I swear to you, I could sell hundreds.
Yeah.
Just don't make that many. But I only want to sell them as pairs to keep them going, just as to prove the point of what we're talking about. You want to keep a bloodline pure, keep them together, keep them as pairs, sell them with provenance. And that's what people need to understand. It's not hard. It's not like I'm coming up with something difficult. If you give a shit about reptiles in the reptile industry, because you're not getting any more out of the wild. No one's going to Hog Island and picking them up and bringing them back anymore.
Yeah, what we got is what we got.
Even our friend Dave Kaufman went there with my friend Quetzal Dwyer from Reptilandia, and they must have found 6 or 7 of them real fast. They are there. But nobody's bringing them back. You're not getting permits to bring those back. There's no reason to take them back. They were almost extinct.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't just repeat the same mistake would be stupid.
Yeah, just leave them there. We'll breed them here. If people are smart, they'll get them from me, and they'll just keep breeding them, and they'll have real ones.
Yeah.
And I keep using them as an example because they're the prime example of a locality boa that was pet trade, that became common and then was bastardized, so to speak, and now try and find real ones.
No.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it just works in the favor of those who actually stuck it through, because now you have the pot of gold sitting in your snake room,
Is it really?
I mean, from a genetic standpoint.
For some, And for some people,
Yeah, for me, a genetic standpoint, I have a lot of little pots of gold, but I just feel that nobody really gives a shit. I'm sorry.
I get it. It's a small percentage. I mean, it is. It's a much smaller percentage compared to the desire to just morph everything and hybridize everything.
Yeah.
And like we were saying, there is a place for the morphs and the hybrids. They are there, and they look great, and I'm not knocking them in any way because I have made some myself. But I won't mix my localities into my albinos, not doing it.
Yeah. I always wonder why people can't. I guess it's maybe just the flashiness of some of the morphs is just more visually appealing, and people can't stop comparing apples to oranges. But I feel like why do so many people seem to have trouble appreciating a darker, muddier, whatever type of snake? Like with the boas, I remember when Central American boas, it's cool to see that there is a following for them now, because I remember when it seemed like nobody wanted anything to do with any small, dark, dirty boa, and now there is at least a kind of a cult following for them, and I don't understand why it's like, can't you see the beauty in those animals as well? Yeah. Not everything has to be a neon sign, I guess is my point.
Well, for many years, I was only selling locality boas in Europe because they were the only people that really appreciated them. So I was going from 2004 till I think the last year I went there vending was 2019.
Okay.
From 2004 to like 2014, maybe, I was going almost every year. I would go to Houghton, Holland. I'd meet up with my friend Frank. I'd go to Houghton Snake Day, and I would go to the Ham Show in Germany, which for him and I was like a 3-hour drive from where he lived in Holland. And I would do those shows, and I specifically just brought locality boas, and they were all pre-sold. I would bring them there, and people would pay me what I felt they were worth. and they have all appreciated them really, really well, because nobody really cared about them in the U.S. yet.
Right.
Yeah.
And then after my books, then people kind of got it. You're like, oh, wow, there is something here, you know?
Yeah.
There's something cool about a snake that only gets 3 or 4 feet, you know, a boa.
Yeah.
So they got more popular. And then with the popularity of them here and the prices going up, it wasn't really worth it to go to Europe anymore.
Sure.
And you'd figure there'd be all the ones I sold over there, there'd be some over there, but there really aren't that many over there anymore. You know, they're almost like, for example, the Corn Island boa, I think, is extinct now in captivity, other than the ones I've got, and maybe a few pair or two in the U.S. Every other one I've seen of those are imposters. They're not even close. So, and I sold a lot of those in Europe. I'm surprised they're not resurfacing. They probably did, and they were bred to something else, maybe a Nicaraguan boa or a hyponic or something.
Yeah.
And they get all mixed and matched. Same with croquets in Europe. I've seen lots of croquets for sale in Europe, and they don't look anything like the ones I have, not even close. So that's the only problem with creating these lines, is that no matter what happens, it just takes one guy to breed it to something that looks similar, but it's not.
Yeah.
And then they're lost to culture. You know, my friend Gus Renfro said, you can mix lemonade and Kool-Aid. You're never going to get lemonade or Kool-Aid back again.
Yeah.
Ever. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Once you mix it into something else, it's gone forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously.
You can't bring it back.
Nope.
It's extinct. And I think that's what most people don't understand.
Yeah, if you haven't been around to see that happen to anything, you know, where you see that, like, it's like, oh, I remember when those used to be pretty, you know, kind of all over the place. A quick one that always comes to mind is the Savu pythons. I remember when those were cheap, and then it's like, where are they now?
Yeah.
And it was interesting when you were mentioned with the locality boa stuff, because I remember thinking, I was just thinking of the timeline. You said it was like 2004 to 2014 when you were going to Europe.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes sense, because I remember I was getting out of keeping around in the early 2000s, and at that time it seemed like nobody really there wasn't a whole lot of interest in the locality stuff and specifically the Central American stuff. And then when I got back into keeping in 2017, 2018, it's like, oh, these are actually popular now. These are starting to get like a following. So it's pretty cool. But that was no doubt in big part to your efforts there. So I would say, to give a little bit of encouragement, at least, I mean, that did make a tangible difference. You know what I mean? It did. It's slow going, and it's difficult work, but I think there is some proof in the pudding there that it does work. You know, to put that effort out in there.
And like I said, there is a good following of people who want to keep them pure, which is great.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I get constant reminders almost daily, you know, in the emails. Dear Vin, I want a croquet boa because I found one at a reptile show and I want another one. So it's like, no.
Now, in that situation, would you be willing to? Did you just try to push them to do a pair?
I do.
So they got a trio. Just say, do a trio, and that's it.
Pair and get rid of that other snake, or give it to somebody as a pet and write it off as generic boa, because you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You really don't. You know, even if it looks close. Even if it looks close. Correction. Even if it looked exactly like a croquet boa.
Yeah.
There's no proof that it is.
Yeah.
It's like a German Shepherd mongrel could look like a German Shepherd, but it could be half lab, you know? It just looks like a German Shepherd. It took more to the German Shepherd side, you know?
Right.
It's no different.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question kind of related to it. Aside from your book, do you think there were any kind of main catalysts that sparked that surgence of locality popularity in the U.S.?
Well, I think about how this business has grown. You know, if you're into the pet industry like I am, you know, I was into all the aspects of the pet industry my whole life. I bred fish, I bred birds. I keep koi. I keep fish still. I saw the business go from just fish and birds to fish, birds, reptiles, small animals. And the one part of this industry that grew the most over the last, I'm going to say 40 years, because I've been doing this since I'm a kid, is reptiles, And it's, for me, it was just like locality bow was a given. It was, once I got the first hogs and the first longicatas, and then I met up with other people that were into it, like Gus. Gus was one of the first guys I met that was into locality boas. Then once you start talking to people like that are into it, then it's like an addiction. It's you have somebody to compare notes with, and then you start seeing other things coming in. What I'm getting at is it's like the natural evolution of the business.
Yeah.
So people naturally were going to get into the locality boas because, like Chris was saying, there's a beauty to them too. To me, there's nothing better looks-wise than a Suriname boa. That red tail and a Suriname boa, especially like a Pokegron Suriname boa.
Yeah.
The classic look.
To me, that, and I always wondered, like the first time I saw a Suriname boa as a kid in the Staten Island Zoo, I was like, why does this snake have that red tail? What does this tail do for this snake in the wild?
Yeah.
How is the snake cryptic in the wild? And the first time I went to Ecuador, up in the trees were these bromeliads. They're like a flowering orchid type plant. And they have these red flowers that look like triangles. It's hard to explain unless you pull up a picture of one. But they almost look exactly like a red tail boa tail. The way the triangles are lined up.
Makes sense.
And as soon as I saw that, I'm like,
there you go.
The red tail
You got that answer. Yeah,
That's gotta be it. Why else would these snakes have these bright red tails? They're up in a tree trying to blend in with the bromeliad. They're eating a bird or whatever it is. So I think it's just the natural evolution for this industry for people to be like, oh wow, a locality snake might be the thing for me. Plus, they stay small. Some of them, especially the locality island types.
Yeah.
So,
I feel like as the hobby pushes more towards naturalistic keeping, fewer animals, bigger enclosures, etc., that mindset kind of goes hand in hand with locality type animals. I mean, who wants to build out some big elaborate zoo-esque display enclosure and then put like a 4-gene snake in it? I mean, not that it wouldn't be cool, but like you're trying to recreate the wild. Naturally, you would put a snake in there that looks like the wild. So that probably has something to do with it as well.
Yeah.
And I think, like you were saying too, that kind of it little groups of nerds basically kind of proliferate all this and get excited and encourage each other. Like that's exactly probably how all of us at some point, like you were saying, you had that with Gus Renfro, like my friend Barry Swope and Mike Fabrizio when we were kids. Like that was the way it was. It was like just a couple of, all it takes is one or two other people that are excited about it to get you just as into it, and then you start kind of figuring out what you're really into. And my group of friends, we were excited about a lot of stuff, the same things at that time when we were young, but then we all kind of found our real passionate species that we were into.
Right.
Like, okay, this is what, Mike really loves boas, and Barry likes the ball pythons, and I like the emeralds and chondros, and but it all came from that initial kind of nerdiness of just feeding off of each other. So yeah, I think that's got a lot of encouragement for the future of the hobby.
Oh yeah, and when I was a kid, I was into reptiles since the day I was born. I would go to summer camp and find snakes and turtles and frogs, and if it wasn't for the fact that we moved our home when I was about 14 to a new town, started in a new high school, and it was a giant high school. The school I came from was like 100 kids, and then I ended up in a high school of 1,500 kids. And the first day a kid is like 2 lockers down from me, and he's got a duffel bag, like an army duffel bag. I'll never forget it. He comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, you want to see something cool?" I'm like, "Yeah, what?" He opens the bag, and he's got a Burmese python in there. You know?
That's awesome.
I go to my next class. It's biology class, and he's in the class
Perfect.
with the snake, you know?
That's awesome.
And the teacher is freaking out.
Yeah.
She's like, "Go home and don't come back." And all the kid cared about was, am I getting a 0 for the day? Do I have to go to the principal? She's like, "No, go home and take that snake home and don't come back." So the next day I see him and I'm like, "Dude, what else do you got?" He's like, "I got a bunch of snakes. You want to see them?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "All right, come to my house after school." Now, this is the first kid I met who had a whole room in his house with just snakes, you know?
Yeah.
Reptiles. He had a caiman. You know, I never saw
Nice.
a caiman in somebody's house.
Damn.
Yeah.
So, but if it wasn't for that kid who ended up becoming my best friend in the whole world, and he knew another kid who had Indian pythons, and he knew another kid who had boas, you know, and here I am, the new kid in school, and instantly I'm the reptile nerd with these 3 other kids who are into reptiles too. All of us had reptiles.
I wish my high school had that. That sounds fucking awesome.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome.
But think about it, you know, out of 1,500 kids, the one kid who's the
You
reptile
meet him
geek
immediately. Yeah.
just, you know, gravitates towards me just by happenstance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just happens. But if that single moment in time didn't happen, I don't know if we'd be sitting here talking right now. Who
Quite
knows what
likely
I
not.
would
Yeah.
do?
Who knows? Yeah.
But it's that evolution. It gets people start, you know, spurring each other on, and you know, one thing leads to another, and from all of that, started breeding snakes. And my brother and I had a reptile store in the 80s, right out of high school, and it just went from there. So
Yeah. We always used to, or I used to kind of joke. It was like almost like a magnetic mental illness with a few of our friends. It's like you all kind of pull each other into this insanity.
It really is magnetic, because I'm also into muscle cars. I have a GTO, and when I moved to my neighborhood 20 years ago, the car was in the garage. I never took it out because, you know, I had kids. I wasn't working on it. The very first day I pull it out, one of the neighbors pulls up right at that point, stops his car, gets out.
Yep.
He's like, "I'm going home to get mine," and he has a GTO too. You know, it's like,
Yeah. And then
We
that
lived
did
there
that
a
kind of
couple of years,
re-spark everything.
yeah, we didn't even know each other had a car, and then now to this day we go to car shows together.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, we had that same thing with my group of friends. I was the only one that I never really got bitten by the car bug, but we were all into music as well, and so we got into the, you know, getting really nerdy with gear and everything else and learning instruments. And so yeah, just those tight-knit group of friends really can push a lot of things forward, I think, with different hobbies. It's really the driving force behind everything, I think, in a hobby.
And think about the reptile industry. Now you have Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. That really, that really spurs people on. The last show I had with MJ and Eugene, I was talking about how a lot of the customers I have now are millennial women that just want a cool boa pet. You know, they want an IMG boa, or, you know, a blood boa, something cool, or leopard boa. And they have them, they put them on their Instagram, and they'll tag me in it. You know, look, this is what I got from Vin. And it creates a more momentum, you know, for the industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting time because we didn't have anything like that, you know, back in the day.
No, nobody even knew what was going on. They didn't have the faintest
It was
idea.
just pure luck to run across people. I mean, I think back on some of the things when I was younger, like even stuff like when I have no clue how we ended up finding the herpetological Central Florida Herpetological Society that we had back in the day. I don't remember which one of us found out. I have no clue how that happened because there was no internet, no nothing. It's just somehow one of us, I don't even remember who, found out about it, and we started going there. And then, you know, we met some cool people back in the day, and we realized later on, it was like, man, we're pretty lucky to even have something like this in our area. It was just, you know, to have people like that coming and doing talks and stuff. And I remember like Dennis Sargent. If you do you remember that
Dennis.
name?
Yeah.
Does he still keep?
I don't know. I know he was
I
a
thought he got out
fireman.
of it years ago.
I know he was a fireman. I know he had a heart attack at one point in his
Oh,
career.
okay.
I don't know if he's still alive. He's a little old. He's older than me.
Yeah, he's got to be older.
Yeah, probably a lot older than me. But yeah, I met him many years ago.
Yeah,
He's a good boa breeder.
he had a lot of stuff. I remember because he used to bring the a big photo album to the herp meetings and just set it out there just for people to kind of look through it. And we used to be drooling through all that. And it seemed like he had tons and tons of stuff back then. And I mean, I think it was a pretty large collection. I don't remember if any of us ever got to see his collection in person. I remember he would bring, mostly the photos, and then he would bring a snake or two to the show once in a while. But I remember we always wanted to, but I think he was just like, at that time he's probably like, yeah, I'm not having these annoying kids come over here. But yes, the all that stuff is cool thinking back on that, and now it's just we have this new version of it where a lot of it's going on through the social media platforms, which is really accelerating everything.
Yeah, it really is. It's making
the reach is way huge in comparison.
It's making the industry, making us smaller and the industry larger, which is good in a way. I mean, when I first started doing the big show in Orlando, Wayne's National Reptile Breeders Expo, that was in 1990. When I went to that first show, I knew everybody there, not face to face, but I knew them, whether it be through a herp society, notes from NOAA, a reptile magazine article, or just pen paling with each other. I pretty much knew most of the people there.
Yeah.
And again, they didn't know what I looked like. They knew my name, or they knew me because I may have bought a snake from them, or they bought a snake from me.
Yeah.
But we all were breeding snakes at a time when not a lot of people were, and it was a very small group of people that were doing it seriously. And I mentioned on the last show with MJ, the very first guy I ever met that bred snakes commercially and made money was Eugene Bissett.
Yeah.
I mean, he was breeding gaboon vipers for color morphs, and breeding Burmese pythons and corn snakes and all kinds of stuff. And he was making money at it, which to me blew me away. I was like, wow, you can make money doing this?
Yeah.
Nobody ever thought you can make a living doing this back then.
Yeah,
I had the similar experience that we met where I met Eugene at the 94 it was Orlando still show, and then the next year all of my friends, because I was one of the only ones that went the first year, and then the second year we all went, and we were just geeking out at his booth, and we ended up meeting him, and he invited us to go over there and see it. And I remember actually when you guys did that episode, those old pictures that were being shown, that MJ was showing, I had sent them those. They were the ones we took, the salvageable ones from that, all like little disposable camera photos and stuff. But yeah, we went there, and it was, I couldn't believe somebody was doing that. I was like, wait, this guy, because even seeing the booth, it was like, this is a lot of snakes.
Right.
And then I was like, wait, that's like a small portion of the snakes this guy has. This is like a little chunk of them.
Oh, yeah.
It was insane. And yeah, the gaboons and all, I mean, he had I remember thinking at the time, it was like, does this guy have every fucking species of snake in the world? Because it seems like it.
Yeah.
It's like, this is wild. I didn't know. I was like, how did he acquire all this? Like, it was unbelievable at the time. So yeah, it was definitely cool. And, yeah, good experience for sure. Let's see.
I would say the one kind of downside to that, I mean, not the one, but one downside that's, I think, relevant to the conversation about the social media age is that it seems like a lot of the founders of the industry, the quote unquote legends, as some may refer, kind of can be lost in the shuffle a little bit to a new person, especially in the post-COVID era. I mean, when I was really getting into the, learning about the industry, 2009, 2010, I was a kid and I knew about the Bells, the Max, people like you, Vin, like in the boa world, like Jeremy Stone, and I mean, I could go on and on, but like, the early accessible information was the people who are doing it at the highest level, Ralph Davis and Pete Call. Like, you go to a reptile show now and you ask 100 people who Pete Call is. They have no idea who Pete Call is. 10 years ago, that would be a cardinal sin of being a reptile keeper to not know the name Pete Call. And I think that to me is kind of sad that it's lost on the new era of the reptile industry as to the real pioneers who made this what it is today. And there are some that are on social media and are, putting themselves out there, but a lot of the times these guys don't really feel like doing it, and rightfully so, and they shouldn't have to. I mean, most people who heard any of the episodes that Eugene has been on over the last few months might be their first time ever hearing of Eugene Bissett.
Right.
That's like makes me sick to my stomach that somebody could be in, reptile keeper, even a breeder 5 years in and not know the name Eugene Bissett.
Yeah. And that's why I was saying before, the internet is making us smaller, meaning me.
Yeah.
And I have a presence on the internet, or at least I try to. But yeah, guys like Eugene, nobody knows who Eugene is. If they're been in the hobby for the last few years, they don't know who he is. They don't know who Mark Bell is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know who Pete Call. They don't know who Brian Sharp is. He's another one. He's an older guy who's been doing it forever too.
And he's still around. These guys are still
they're
around
still doing it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They'll never stop.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's part of that too comes down to the the way social media is now, where there's so much stuff where it's kind of face forward, and that's the expectation, is that everything needs to be somebody on film showing their face. And I know I struggle with that. My natural preference would be to just be completely in the shadows and only show animals, but you kind of have to put yourself out there a little bit. It's just the way that it is. But I think also too, just people should make a point. I always try to remember to do this, is to try to give credit where credit's due, and mention bring Eugene's name up when you're talking about old species that he worked with and helped pioneer, and bring Vin's name up when there's anything even remotely boa immediately has to be brought up. I mean, I think just doing that'll help make sure that people know the history and know where things came from. But yeah, it does take that effort, and not everybody necessarily wants to give credit either.
Like I consider myself the kid, because when I started doing this, I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And guys like Mark Bell's about 5 years older than me, Eugene's 17 years older than me. I was the youngest at the time. I was there in the beginning, and I was the one looking up to them, because they were the guys that were doing this for real, and I was basically a hobbyist back then. So I constantly try to emphasize to people that get into this now that me included, was standing on the shoulders of these guys. They did it first.
Mm-hmm.
I consider myself second, maybe, but it really is a shame that these people don't understand the history of it, So that's why, like, even in my books, I try to put the provenance of every race of boa. If you read my book, the last one, every single morph that's in there and every single locality, there's a little verbiage on where it started and who was the first guy to do it in the industry, So that was my contribution of, all right, most people don't know where an albino boa came from, or a leopard boa, or a blood boa. They just know they're cool,
Right.
But there was very specific people that bred them first, who either had them first or got them into the country or paid a lot of money for them, like Pete did with the albinos. And the industry needs to know that. And luckily, it's in a book. You can look it up. But it amazes me how people don't really read that.
Well, I think with that history, I think that's one of the best things with the podcasts these days is that this is an opportunity. It's a good way to get that information out that's digestible for people in multiple formats, because they could sit down and watch this now, or they could just listen to the audio casually.
Yeah, that's true too.
It helps a lot.
This is the time capsule also, you know, because this will be on forever almost, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
And most of the, and I'm not putting anybody down, but most of the younger generation is more apt to video than reading, you know.
Yeah.
So they're listening to podcasts, YouTubes. That's how Brian Barczyk got so big. You know, people are like, oh, wow, that guy's got a cool YouTube channel. You know?
Yeah. It's actually a good segue into a question I've been sitting on for a minute. So, you know, I'm 24 years old, and I've been around the industry for about 15 years now. I don't see nearly as many people in my age demographic being really serious about this as I feel like there were when I was a kid, of like, you know, 20-year-old keepers. I mean, you know, you have Kenny over there, obviously, who's very serious about this, and there's a handful of you know, young people who are really taking this seriously. But do you think that these days there are proportionally fewer young people really taking the industry seriously as there were, let's say, when you were younger, or maybe 20 years ago?
Well, I think the internet might be the culprit, because there's less investigation. There's less camaraderie. There's less people contacting each other, picking each other's brains on how to breed snakes or how to keep reptiles. They can just Google or watch a podcast, and again, it's not a bad thing. No, it's not a great thing, but
different.
It's made it very different. It's created a lot of know-it-alls, you know.
Yeah,
you get
for sure.
These younger people who want to create a TikTok channel, you know, or a YouTube channel, and they'll just post garbage, and they'll do something silly or stupid just to get viewings, and they're not really that serious. So, but I really do believe that if you're serious about this, I call it a business. You know, MJ likes to call it the game. It's a business.
It is,
if you're really serious about it, you really need to be an apprentice under somebody who knows what they're doing. If you don't have one in your area, go travel to them. You know, meet up with people. You know, I was fortunate in that as a kid, I had my group of high school buddies who were all into reptiles, and we were all good at one thing: keeping reptiles. We all knew, and we all were also naturalists. We were into what was outside, you know. Yeah. So we had an understanding. But what I'm getting at with the apprentices is you need to work under the tutelage of somebody else who knows what they're doing, just for even if it's a few years, you know. Yeah. I mentioned this to Eugene last time I saw him, when I saw him last week, and he forgot about it. When we were talking about apprentices, and he had an apprentice, Steve Tillis. Do you guys know Steve Tillis?
Mm-hmm.
Not personally, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know personally, but I definitely know of him. Mm-hmm.
He's got a PhD now, and he's a highly intelligent guy. Very, very smart and very good reptile breeder.
Yeah.
Steve started working with Eugene as a kid, and he wanted to learn how to breed snakes, and you know, Eugene took him in and utilized his brain power too. And he told Steve, because Steve wanted to breed boas too at one time, and he said, if you want to learn about boas, you gotta apprentice with Vin Russo. So Eugene called me, and Steve came to my he flew up from Florida to New York and stayed with me for a couple weeks, and lived in my house, and was the apprentice for a few weeks in my warehouse, and learned a bunch of things from me. You know, he even went home with a bunch of things.
Yeah.
And he went to a family get together with me, and everyone's like, "Who's this kid?" Oh, that's my friend Eugene's apprentice, who's going to be my apprentice for the next few weeks.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is Steve did things like that, and he obviously went to college and got his PhD in reptile, I guess, viruses. So, but that's the extreme example. You know, he went to Eugene and said, "I want to learn how to breed reptiles." Eugene said, "Well, I'm good at this, but Vin's good at boas. You should go to Vin for a while.
Yeah.
He went to Vin. He went to college. He learned everything he could, and now he's got a PhD. You know. The other example would be obviously my apprentice Kenny, who's been with me since he's 16. He's 26. Has he learned everything yet? No, but he's getting there. You know, you need to create that that sense of this is a real career. This isn't. We're not fucking around anymore. This isn't just a hobby or a game. You know, this is a business, and to do it properly, you need to take it seriously. You know, like I try to do with the locality boas. Am I losing money by only selling pairs? Yeah, I'm losing a lot of money. But I feel responsible for that part of this business. You know, there's other things that I make singles, plenty of singles of that I'll sell all day long. But
sure,
that's the model I've created for myself. You know,
I think that's important though, to not only just chase the dollar in every single possible scenario.
It's very important because if you're here just for the money, you're in trouble because you're going to do stupid shit to get it. You know what I mean? And if you take it seriously and do it right, the money will come to you. You'll have animals that are desirable.
Yeah.
I mean, Steven, you got a good thing going with those scrubs because not a lot of people collect scrubs.
Yeah.
And luckily, a lot of them don't get too big.
Yeah.
My favorite scrub is those Moluccans, the yellow ones. That I had those years ago, and those were if I get something back, that it would be them.
Yeah,
they're the coolest thing. They were like they had personalities. They looked at you right in the eye, you know.
Yeah, they're incredible.
It's just something that you'll need for the future because you're not getting them out of the wild anymore. I mean, try and find a Moluccan scrub now from the wild.
Yeah, you have to go to Korea for that.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, stuff like that needs to be proliferated, and in time, I don't know when, but it's going to happen.
Yeah.
They're just going to stop all imports of that stuff.
For sure.
It's just going to come to a screeching halt. We're never going to see them from the wild again, and then they're going to be like, oh, Stephen Kush has them. You know? Oh, Vin Russo's got island boas. Let's get them from him. You know? Oh, Chris, he's got real northern emeralds. You know? They haven't been mixed with Bateseye or garden tree boas.
Yeah.
Because people have done both, right? They've mixed the northerns into Bateseye and into the regular tree boas. So who knows what the future will be like? It'll be like, where can I get a real northern tree boa? Where can I get the patternless northern tree boa? You know? Where can I get a high white northern tree boa? It's gonna be like 3 guys. You know?
Yeah, because this stuff can disappear. I mean, it can happen so fast.
All of it can disappear. So that's why I feel that all 3 of us are responsible for the future. And if more people take it that seriously, then there'll be guarantees for it to be here 100 years, you know?
Right.
Because there's a demand for these things. Whether it is as a hobbyist, a zoo, or another breeder, there is a demand. There is a huge demand for some of these things.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like at least the way that I see it, even just hearing that type of conversation should be enough to inspire anyone to try to aspire to that level. I mean, you know, none of us thought of this as like a novel idea. You know, when I was like getting into my scrub pythons, I'm like, I can do what all of these other guys did with their things, you know, and you use the roadmap that's been laid out for you to achieve that goal. I don't know. To me, I can't imagine hearing what you just said and not being like, want to run through a wall to now do what you know, your species. I don't know.
Yeah.
The way I see it though.
And again, Pete, chasing the thing that's like you're into, not just chasing the thing that's got a dollar on it. You know what I mean?
And I brought this up on MJ's show before about the ball pythons. I breed ball pythons so I can knock them, you know? Yeah. I love ball pythons, but they've created this like pyramid mentality.
Yeah.
You know, buy the snake and you can make this much money. Well, not really. You still got to raise it and breed it and get babies that eat and sell them, you know? It's not that easy. But yet it's created this like get rich quick mentality because they are easy to breed. You can breed them quick. 6 months for a male and 18 months for a female. And if you're impatient, that's the business to be in. I tell people, if you're impatient, breed bearded dragons. You breed them at 6 months old,
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to do tree boas, if you want to do scrub pythons and you want to do boas and tree pythons, you're going to need 4 or 5 years each.
Yeah.
It's the patience and the discipline that gets you to the next level. And patience of doing multiple generations in captivity.
It also draws attention to what you're doing as well. People see that, and the thing is also that the right people see that. The people who you want your animals to go to will catch on to what you're doing, and now you have less of a chance of those animals going into a shitty situation because at the end of the day, none of us want that. And if that type of mentality, loose way that I see it, attracts the right kind of customer to you.
For sure, and that's why I'm trying to not. There's a saying: if you sell your animals cheaper, you're just going to get worse customers because you're just opening up a market to people that don't give a shit. And I'm not saying that. Cheap is perspective. What's cheap? Sure. I'm just saying, I'm not going to like crash my prices just to sell things to make the money out of them but that's what's happening with ball pythons. I'd rather hold on to them and breed them than sell them cheap. But thank God I have races of animals I don't have to do that with. But by creating a rare animal that has a demand and creating a market for it, you're letting people understand this is a responsibility. It's not just a get rich quick thing. You buy a pair of locality boas, you're in it for 4 years. It's that simple.
Minimum.
Yeah. You buy a pair of northern tree boas, you're in it for 4 years from babies, no matter which way you turn it.
Yeah.
Same with the scrubs. I mean, they take a while to mature those things.
Yeah.
But that's what we got to do. We have to let all of the different age groups understand, Yeah. This is a responsibility for the future. Do we make money at it? Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Are we wealthy? No, I'm not.
No, it's not a good. Yeah, and
but
not.
This business has afforded me the time to spend with my wife and kids, and do whatever I want when I want.
Yeah.
And make my own hours, even though my own hours are mostly reptiles because you're responsible for living things.
Right.
But still, like when my kids were young, if they had a play or they were in orchestra, I can go to their school anytime I want. And I wasn't rich living in a fancy neighborhood. No, but my kids went to a good school. We have a nice home. We go on vacation when we want. And it afforded me that lifestyle because it's a business that I took seriously.
And how much of that time that you're working, I mean, you're doing something you enjoy. You actually like what you're doing. Like you would want to be there anyways.
Yeah. I turned my passion and hobby into a business.
Yeah.
And now I say this all the time. I treat it like stocks. Some stocks are up. Some stocks are down. Some stocks you got to hold back. Some stocks you got to sell. And that's what these snakes are in a way. Even though I'm passionate about them and they're living things, it's still a business and I have to make money to pay my bills with it. But I'm not going to sell out and just dump stuff and be like, oh, that's it, I'm out, Everything's $5, But I see that in this industry because people aren't doing it full time. They're doing it part time. And the few guys that do it full time take it a little more seriously. So we need to encourage people to get into it full time, because like I said, these things aren't coming out of the wild too much longer. No.
Yeah.
No, it's everything seems to be coming in less and less numbers.
Everything.
Other than just being more dedicated and taking what you're doing more seriously, are there any tips that you would give to somebody who has that aspiration to make that jump to being a full-time snake breeder, so to speak?
Well, like Chris was saying, and you were saying, do what you like. You know,
Yeah.
like I love boas.
Yeah.
I love tree pythons. I love pine snakes. You know, these are all things that I have. And
Yeah.
I do the things that I really love. I used to really love my ball pythons, and I still have plenty of them. I'm not getting rid of them. But it's like I'll put more effort into other things because the stock right now is a little low on them. You know?
Yeah.
So if you're going to get into this, pick something you really like. I mean, think about it. Very few people have taken, let's say, for example, even bearded dragons. There's a lot of generic bearded dragons out there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can count on one hand how many people are breeding them to make red ones and yellow ones. You know?
Yeah.
Like Ron St. Pierre and Heather. They have the reddest bearded dragons you'll ever see in the world. You know? How about try and make something like that? You know, if you're going to get into bearded dragons, go to them and get the reddest ones they got and start making as red as you can, you know? There's so many things that still haven't been done yet. Take something and perfect it. You know, if you're really into something, you know, do it. If you really love tree pythons and you think Arus are the coolest thing, stop breeding them for high white. That's what I'm trying to do. You know, it's like pick the ones with the most fucking white on them and keep breeding them until you get a snowflake, you know? Like that one guy, Ed Marino's got those high white baits eye. It's like, why can't I do that with our Arus, you know?
Yeah.
It
Well,
can
like
be
Ed
done.
himself, and like Ed himself said, it's like he's said it 1,000 times probably. It's like, it's just I took the time to do it. I sat there and just kept
Multiple
breeding them,
generations.
and just had that
picking
patience
the
to do
whitest
it.
ones, and breeding them to each other.
Yeah.
So it's like somebody's got to start doing stuff like that. And you know, Eugene used to say to me 30 years ago, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of this industry. And he was so right. He was so right. Because this
it is
industry,
crazy thinking how much it's grown in that time.
It's a
Like
multi-billion
really thinking back to it, and you
industry.
have much better perspective on that than either of us can.
Yeah.
Multi-billion dollar industry. It's huge. It's
Yeah.
tremendous. The amount of reptiles that go through this industry is incredible. I mean, what were the numbers? I think Petco was doing something like 90,000 corn snakes a year they were selling. I mean,
That's crazy.
where are they coming from? There's got to be guys like, you know, Eugene and John Mack and
The
Mark
Bell.
Bell who are pumping out 20,000-30,000 a year or more. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know what their numbers are, but
Yeah. One thing that to me is interesting, that's really encouraging, especially the last few shows I've been to, like companies like Chewy, like these big corporate conglomerates that are dumping massive
seem to be putting more effort in.
building reptile departments. Those corporations, they don't do that for fun. They do that for money.
No.
And
they
they don't
hire
know money is there.
Yeah, they hire actuaries who find out exactly how much money they can make doing this stuff. They know. Yeah, they know for sure.
And honestly, the more money that is in this industry, the more protected we're going to be in the long run too, as far as legislation and all of that goes. You know, money runs Washington. So, and obviously we're pretty far behind, but like if some big corporation like Chewy or Amazon has some sort of stake in what we're doing here, we're in better shape to stay around because they don't want to lose that revenue stream.
Right.
And they have the power to do that. So,
well, you know, back in trying to remember the year, 2010, 12, somewhere around that, there was a proposed bill in Washington, HR 669.
Yeah, I remember that one.
They were trying to outlaw all boas and pythons.
Yeah.
And I remember I was on the board with PJAC then. I'm still on the board there now. They changed the name. But anyway, I remember there was an attorney there, Marshall Meyer. He was in good with some people at PetSmart and Petco, and I remember he was asking me about details on, how many boas you think are born in captivity, and we came up with an idea of how many boas are born in captivity compared to what's being taken out of the wild. And I remember they were ready to get rid of boas completely. Like they were including them with Burmese pythons, like all boas. Yeah. And somebody from Petco and somebody from PetSmart got involved. And once they said, no, we have a SKU for those and we sell them in the stores, and it just dropped. No more boas, So it just goes to show you when you get some big company like that involved. Plus, they were proving, based on the numbers that PJAC came up with, including with my help, that these are domesticated animals we're selling. They're not wild caught animals.
Yeah.
So they even called it the Wild Animal Bill at one point, the HR 669. And like, all right, well, define a wild animal.
Right. Yeah.
Is 3 or 4 generations in captivity wild or domesticated?
Right.
So that's another thing that we are working on, all 3 of us, domesticating reptiles. My Hog Island boas and all my island boas and locality boas are domesticated. They've been in captivity multiple generations.
Yeah, decades.
Could one live in the wild if you brought it back? It might, because they're, it's like a feral cat. You put a cat in the wild, it'll live too. But it's a calico cat or a Persian cat, and many generations to make it look that way.
Right.
So but we're dealing with domesticated creatures here. It's that simple.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, put a leopard gecko in the wild, that thing probably won't make it more than a few weeks, No.
It would get eaten. It's too bright.
Yeah.
It's too yellow now.
Where's my dish of mealworms? I'm going to die.
Yeah. I don't know where to get my mealworms.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's... I think you'd have to think that these days, more and more people who are not involved in the industry at least are somewhat seeing that side of things now, that just it's becoming more of a mainstream thing, that no one looks at a multi-gene ball python a kid has and thinks like that's a wild animal. Like,
right?
How could you think this like pink, white, and blue is a wild animal? Like, come on.
Right.
Yeah, and most people, like family, friends, or anything like that ask me questions or send stuff, it's always things like that. It's like, oh, have you seen this crazy, wild looking morph or whatever, this crazy snake? And one thing on the growth of the hobby, I can't remember who I was talking to recently. I think it was a family member. I kind of mentioned something about like, oh yeah, I know it's kind of weird, I have snakes and all this stuff, and they were like, it's really not that weird anymore. And it made me realize, I'm like, I guess they're kind of right. It used to be, it was like an odd thing, and now it's like they're like, it's not really that weird to be keeping snakes. Maybe how many I have, but not. It's just not that out of the ordinary anymore. And that's I don't have full perspective on it, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting because, like you were saying with your experience as a kid, Vin, and yet I'm sure Steven's was probably similar, and mine was definitely similar in that it was like a few people, and that was it. The whole area. It was weird. It was strange at that time. It was like, and especially if you had a lot of them, it was like, that's very weird to be keeping that many of them. So
just the people I worked with, that was it. Like, I didn't tell anyone at high school. Like, I don't want to be that fucking weird guy with the snakes. Like, how did you guys making fun of me?
You were so you hid it the whole time in high school, or for most people, like.
Honestly, yeah, and I regret it in hindsight, but I really did. Yeah, I mean, a few friends, like my closest friends, knew about it, and then it sucked. At the end of high school, like the school paper did like an article, like, you do the snake thing, that's kind of cool, and like no one gave a shit. I'm like, I could have just been talking about this the whole fucking time. I'm like, I'm stupid. Whatever. But I mean, that's why I say like 15 years ago was. You have snakes? What's that? And now the response is, oh yeah, my cousin has a ball python. Like that's how people react to like
somebody they know personally.
They all know somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like people know ball pythons the same way they know dog breeds or hamsters. Like, the most popular reptiles are they're a pet the same way that anything else you see at Petco is these days. Like, people just know about them. It's part of the zeitgeist.
It's pretty cool though. I mean,
Yeah, it's awesome.
One of my daughters, when she was in like I guess 4th or 5th grade, one of the kids in her class had a pet boa, and he knew who I was. Just from probably one of my books. And she comes home from school. She's like, "Oh, Dad, this kid Dominic knows who you are, and he wants to meet you." All right.
Does she care, or is she just like,
like, great?
Yeah, it's like, Dad.
So I met the kid. I gave him a ball python, and he was ecstatic. It was like his birthday, so he gets a ball python for his birthday from me. And
you're like, "Hey, kid, you want to come clean cages for free?"
Yeah. He wanted to, but he wasn't old enough. He was like 10 or something.
Oh, okay.
I told him not till you're like 16 or until you can drive at least.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny.
Yeah.
Small world. Yeah.
So I guess to get back onto some of the other more feeding-based topics here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think we transitioned 2 hours.
Yeah, is everybody still doing good on time, or is it's not? I'm good to go for. It's not bothering anybody. Okay. So one thing on the food cycling and kind of fasting, giving them a period of lots of food and a period without. Do you start the juveniles on that same schedule right away? Like just start right off the bat, right from birth, they kind of follow that seasonality, or do you change it a little bit with them, or?
No, all the juveniles are started on a pretty regular feeding cycle to get hardened off. Do you know what I mean by hardened off?
Yes, but I'd love to hear you explain it in detail as far as, because I know a little bit of what you're getting at here.
Because one of these boas and pythons are born. They're soft and mushy,
Mm-hmm.
They go through a shed cycle 10 days after after they hatch or birth. And then you can start feeding them. So I'll feed them, basically every 4 or 5 days. I'll feed them when they're first born, that first summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I call it hardening off because once you do that and you feed them probably, let's say about a dozen times, you're in pretty good shape after that. It's almost like bulletproof. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah. That instant. My kind of view of that, and it's probably the same, it's like an animal that you basically can see it has full confidence in the response to food. It's not confused by it. It's not nervous. It's like it knows the deal. It knows the routine. It knows the program. Boom. And some of them seem to be almost like that. Some of them are almost like that right out of the gate.
Right.
And then others may take, like you said, quite a few meals and time to get to that point. But yeah, I know what you mean on that sense.
But I'll feed them as much as they'll eat in the beginning because I want them to get that head start. Because I truly believe that in the wild, when a boa or even a python is born, they're born specifically at a time of year when there's an abundance of food for them.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay, so I like using the example of baby boas and baby tree pythons because they come from similar environments, baby Amazons and northerns. They're born at a time of year when there's probably a lot of geckos and skinks and tree frogs, small animals, to eat. There's probably a lot of them. I've been to the tropics a few times, and you walk through, even Florida. How many animals do you see basking in front of a store? They're everywhere.
You have to get a watch not to step on.
Right.
Sometimes a year, there's so many of them.
Like a baby corn snake. Mm-hmm. He's eating big, small animals, and when he's born that summer, probably eating as many as he can get. What the chances of him bumping into him are pretty good. And I think the same thing happens in the Amazon basin. I think the same thing happens in Indonesia.
Yeah.
I think these little snakes are born, and the chances of bumping into a skink or a skink or a gecko or even a tree frog are pretty good.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking they're eating more than we can think. So they're eating that first summer, they're eating pretty good. But that's it. I don't continue that for years. You know, I get them hardened off till the end of that summer. It gets cooler. My building gets cooler. I just stop feeding them. I don't feed them anymore. They don't have to eat all winter. I let them get a little cooler too, because if they're cooler, they're not going to be using up calories. You know, they get cooler at night. The other mistake that people make, and I hear them talk about it a lot, I don't know if you guys do this or not, is during the feeding season, they're letting them get cool at night. I don't do that in the feeding season. Maybe towards the end of the feeding season, when my building is already getting a little cool anyway. But in the heat of the summer, my building doesn't get cooler at night. You know, the whole nighttime drop thing is, I think people have lost contact with the nighttime drop thing. They think it's all year round, and it really isn't.
Yeah.
Again, it's just my opinion.
For sure.
Well, I guess it depends on. Well, it probably depends, I guess, on how they're running their setups. Because I would say, since you're doing primarily ambient, and I'm doing primarily ambient as well, it's just there isn't a huge night drop really. Just naturally, it's pretty minimal.
Exactly.
But if you're in an area where it's pretty cold, then and you're relying more heavily on external heaters, that's where it probably can cause some problems, because they're trying to get that night drop down, and it's hard to balance all that. So yeah, I think I feel like probably a good half of the year here, the nighttime ambient, at least in that back room of the emeralds, is still 80, 81 degrees half the time, 79, something like that.
Yeah.
Now the colder months it can go down 70, sometimes even 68. But yeah, it's still pretty warm overall. But then it's a higher ambient during the day, so it's also peaking at 88, 90 maybe for a couple of hours. So it seems like it's still relative. There's still always a 5 to 10 degree drop.
I had a friend of mine who's like an older timer breeder, who's a well-known guy. It was a couple of years ago, said to me, "Oh, Vin, I fed my Guyana boa and she threw up, and I don't know what's wrong with her." And I'm like, it was like the middle of the winter. I'm like, why are you feeding it in the middle of the winter? Oh, I thought it was hungry. I'm like, well, how cold is it getting tonight? Oh, like 68. I'm like, you gave it a big meal, and feeding it at 68 at night with no heat source. I mean, that's like you're asking for something to happen.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is, once the winter comes, even the babies, I'm not feeding them. They don't need to be fed. They'll be fine. They've been hardened off, and they've been fattened up, and not even fattened up. They've been hardened off. They have muscle tone.
Yeah.
They're ready to go. They're fine. And if you do that every year with your snakes, by the time they're 5 years old, they will breed.
Yeah, they're used to that cycle.
The cycles and the seasonalities, and that's another reason why people offer me adult snakes all the time, and I won't take them. Because those adult snakes, 99.9% of the time, have been living in one season for 4 or 5 years. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
They've lived the summer.
Food all the time. Yep.
Yeah, they lived the summer for 5 years.
Yeah.
A friend of mine gave me a tree python 2 years ago, and a beautiful Aru. And he's like, oh, it's tame. And it was tame, but I don't need tame snakes. I really don't care. But this thing was fat, so I didn't feed it much, and it was difficult to get it into a breeding mode because it was fat.
Yeah.
But it went into breeding mode just because it was fat already, even though I didn't feed it. And it laid all duds, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So I figured, all right, well, now I've thinned it out. I'll put it back into another feeding regimen of my own. Gets grab it again, lays at duds again. So it's like, I'm wasting my fucking time.
Yeah.
With the snake, because it's been ruined already.
Yeah.
The guy who had it fed it too much. It was a fat slob. And it's lived its whole life, living one summer its whole life. And now it just can't get used to any form of seasonality I give it.
Yeah.
And I know how to do that. It's not like I don't know what I'm doing with it.
Yeah.
Same thing happened to me with a boa. A friend of mine gave me a boa that I gave her. She gave it back. And it took me 3 seasons to get a good litter out of this thing. And I'm like thinking to myself, how much food and time I wasted on this snake when I could have raised one up in that time. In my seasons,
Yeah.
So I really don't. I hate taking adult snakes from people. I don't even want them. People offer them to me for free. I'm like, I don't want them.
I've learned that lesson the hard way a few times. Yeah, it's a hard one to learn,
especially with scrubs. If a scrub is raised in a dry environment, fed too much, and it's a big clunker, and you get it, good luck, man. It's not going to do anything.
No, I had a Moluccan female that I got at about 12 feet long, and like, holy shit, like
that's way too hard.
Yeah, and she dropped me 25 slugs, and I was just like, oh my God. I just like laid on the floor and probably just cried. I'm like, oh God,
Yeah.
this is the worst day of my life. Yeah.
You know what my theory is with the heavy snakes? My theory is that the sperm can't travel through the oviduct.
Just too much fat clogging it.
Exactly. There's just too much fat, and it's clogging it up. I mean,
okay.
I think it's putting too much pressure. There's not enough flow for the sperm to get there.
Makes sense.
It's too much pressure from the fat. Because think about it, their skin is holding in all that fat, so it's like a sausage that's compact and compressed, and there's not enough room for the sperm to get through. That's my theory on heavy snakes, because it's the same problem with all the heavy snakes. You're getting infertile eggs, whether it's a boa or a python.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I think a lot of people seem to struggle with is just, really truly accepting the fact that these animals are not meant to be fed to the shitter like that, like to where you're just gorging them nonstop, and it's, I mean, it was a hard thing for me to unlearn a bit, when I got back into keeping. I never fed truly power fed back in the day when I was a kid, but it was definitely just the norm was every single week, no questions asked, you're around 24, always doing that. And so you got to resist that urge. Even the few times with the emeralds, I have a couple that it's like just a few too many meals in a short period of time, and too large, or, just a little big and too frequent, and they'll start to look a little chubby just from a few meals.
Yeah.
So I'm learning that over time. It's like, man, you gotta balance that. That's when it comes down to reading the animal and realizing, do you actually need to eat, or do I, just ignore you for a week or two, or even a month in some cases, and just say you eat, 6 weeks from now.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just still they're learning, but they're that natural assumption that they need to eat every single time that they show that they're hungry or that they're interested in food is something that's hard for me to accept.
I call it, the Italian grandma syndrome.
Yeah, very much so.
You eat something, and people think right away. I'll get emails from people. Vin, I got this, boa from you. It was eating great all summer, and now it won't eat. There's something wrong with it. I'm like, well, what are the temperatures in your house? Oh, well, it's 68 at night, and it's got a hot spot of 85. And I'm like, why are you feeding it? It doesn't need any food.
Yeah.
It ate fine all summer. Just leave it alone.
Yeah.
But people cannot stand seeing their snake not eating. It drives them nuts.
Yeah.
They think it's like a dog. You got to feed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They think, and it's well intended. Like they're concerned for the animal. They're thinking, oh shit, it's gonna die. But it's like, dude, if it goes 6 months, it'll be fine. If it's got decent body weight on it, you barely even tell the difference between, But I've had them. I had the one female emerald that gave birth last year. I think she went like 8.5 months without a meal, and gave birth to a perfect litter. And I mean, she looked pretty good afterwards. She still looked pretty good.
All of my boas don't eat for 7-8 months.
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah. And there's not a concern.
No.
As long as they're in good shape, and if they're scrawny and emaciated going into breeding, that's not a good idea. But they don't need to be slobs either.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had plenty of people tell me, "Oh, Vin, you're misleading people," because you don't want them to breed the snakes. I'm like, if I was doing that, I wouldn't have written a book on how to breed snakes.
Yeah.
But, it's like you're feeding them way too much. It's that simple.
It's even funny, too, because people would make an accusation like that, because it's like there's pictures and documentations of the animals you're producing, the adults. It's just like, it's all right there. There's no like tricks being pulled.
It's not
here.
like I'm secretly feeding them a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be seeing it. Yeah, you'd see the animals.
Facility at 3 a.m. just with rats. Turn the security system off for a while.
Yeah, nobody knows I did this, but I fed them all a lot.
Yeah, the thing I get with the emeralds is everybody's understandably concerned about the defecation, and then the there's that tendency to wanna the nanosecond it's taking a shit, shove another meal in it.
Yeah.
In the rigid schedule, it's like, well, it's been 3 weeks and it hasn't crapped yet. I haven't fed it. What do I do? And it's just like, you don't do anything. Just let it go to the bathroom. And I picked up on this, and this was really driven home to me primarily from listening to Ed Marino talk about it with the Amazon basins, but also with you with the boas and Ryan Wollaston. Is it's like to avoid having all those constipation issues, you just allow the snake to eat a meal, digest it, pass the meal, and then be active for a little while.
Right.
And then just don't. Then at some point you realize, like, oh, I haven't even had to think about that problem in several years now, because there just isn't a problem anymore.
There's another thing that people miss out on too, and humans are no different. Humans get constipated too. It's because they don't drink enough water.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not hydrated,
the other huge one.
Yeah, if you're not hydrated enough. I mean, think about where these snakes come from. I mean, emeralds, scrubs, boas, all pythons. Well, not all pythons, but most. It's 98% humidity all the time.
Yeah.
For you to think keeping them at 30% humidity in your house and they're going to shit normally, it's not going to happen. They need humidity. It's incredible because, in the past, I've had people give me a constipated snake, and all I'll do is put it in a sweater box with wet sphagnum moss in a big water bowl and mist it down and put 90-degree heat in the back, leave it for 24 hours, and by the end of the 24 hours, it takes a huge shit, and give it back. They're like, it's done.
Yeah.
You should just keep them more humid. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's definitely something that, and again, I think back in the day, I feel bad with some of the snakes I kept that I'm sure were, even here in Florida, I'm sure they were dried out.
Oh yeah. I did it
just keeping them in a wood cage with a total screen top and blasting them with too high of a lamp 24 hours a day and just not enough humidity.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
because people,
fish tanks.
Yeah. I think people often, I know, because I've made jokes about humidity and gotten into shit with people about it, but I think people assume in Florida that it's just like everywhere indoors is 95% humidity just all the time, and it's like, no, it's not how it is. You still got to put some effort in, and you still got to try to maintain it right. But it's a little easier. I'm sure it's tough if you're living in an area where it's like you're lucky if it's 10 or 15% humidity in your room,
Texas
and that's a challenge
Arizona,
for sure.
Right?
Yeah. But you still got to do, whatever you're working with, you still have to figure out how to get it to the humidity as good as you can, as high as you can reasonably maintain it.
Yeah, like I keep my chondros like 95% humidity most of the time.
Yeah.
They don't do well if they're not humid.
Mm-hmm.
You poop constantly, big giant wet poops, which is what I look to see. It's all right, fine.
Yeah, my Beocs in particular, the Beoc males are so damn active that it's almost annoying how often they'll piss in chicks. It's like, Jesus, I feel like I just changed this thing.
Yeah.
Do you notice that difference? Do you notice a difference between that with like Beocs compared to the other ones? I feel like they pass, meals quicker and they feel like they're sped up a little bit in general compared to to Viridis.
Yeah, Beocs the one thing I noticed with Beox too is they take longer to mature too. They obviously get bigger, you know. I can't say they're the largest race because I've seen some Arus that were pretty big. I have a couple of Marukis that are pretty big.
Nice. Oh, those are awesome.
But the Beox take a little longer to mature. It seems they need to be bigger to breed. They need to be bigger, you know, more mature and bigger too to breed, and they do have a good metabolism. They do poop pretty much, you know.
And even their movements, to me, it's like they're just kind of jerkier and a little more. They act a little different in that way.
They're definitely more high strung. They stress out far easier, you know, because all the Beox I have were wild caught, all of them.
Yeah.
And I got every one of them. I put the plants in the front of the cage so they can't see me. And I mean, they got to look through the plant to see me.
Yeah.
All the other ones, the plants are in the back, and they're hung up like next to it, the plant. But the Beox, the plants are in the front, and they're behind them. Because if they see me all the time, they get stressed out. They don't like it, and you'll know they'll start swinging at the cage at the door, you know. And if they do that too often, the stress of it affects their eating, you know. So you just cover it up so they can't see it, you know.
Yeah. Do you notice with the Beox, so the captive ones are a little more mellow, it seems.
Even the captive ones are a little crazy too. I don't know what it is.
Oh yeah, compared to like a ruse or
yeah.
But they're at least a little more mellow than the wild caught.
Yeah, they are. They're calmer because they were born used to seeing you around. The Beox too.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, if I take one out, it's still even the captive ones that like kind of spazzing around. They're definitely more nervous. Yeah.
Like I have a friend who's like, "Oh, I want to hold them. You know, which is the best one?" I was like, "None of them.
Yeah.
They're gonna get you. Even in the summer when they're hungry, they'll get you, man. It doesn't matter if it's a Beox or an Aru or anything. They're swinging."
Yeah.
Oh, I had one thing, just an odd thing with regard to ontogenesis. With I've mostly noticed this with emeralds. I don't know if I've really observed it with chondros, but I noticed I kind of picked up on it with this past few litters that I started seeing like a pretty drastic overnight color shift happen when they would take a big shit, and then I kind of picked up on that quite a few times where I'm like, seems like there's correlate, like there's something in synchronization there, because I started thinking like, well, I always assumed a lot of times that you'd find them, it's like, oh, this one changed pretty significantly overnight and it shed, but a lot of times it also shit as well. Do you think is there something there to that? Like is there something with the metabolism that's directly correlated to a notable shift like that, or is that just coincidence I'm seeing?
I've noticed that there's a color shift with a meal.
Okay.
Meaning if they're in that point in their life where they're starting to change, like I was telling you, I feed them a little more often, the younger snakes. I noticed that you can push it along with a few more meals. It'll happen faster.
Yeah.
I also had a weird phenomenon happen this year, which I've never really was cognizant to before, but in the past, I've never kept whole litters as long as I have now. But I had a litter of Arus that I kept, and I can sex them at 6 months old. I just run them through my hands and I can pick the males, right, pretty easily. I've been doing it for a long time, and it's worked out so far to be pretty much like 99% accurate.
Cool.
The
That's
weird
just from
thing,
palpating for the hemipines?
yeah, I'm just feeling for the hemipenes, and I'm really gentle. I don't pull on them and fuck with them, so I just run them through my hands.
The emeralds as well.
Just run them through my hands once and put them back in. And if it's a male, you'll feel a little tiny lump in their tail. But what I'm getting at is this one particular litter. It was Arus. All the ones that proved out to be males were still yellow, and all the ones that were females turned green already.
Hmm.
So the odd thing was it was exactly 50-50.
Huh.
Clutch was 50-50 males, females, and exactly the females were green and the males were yellow at like 6 months old, 7 months old, something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then I had some Marukis about the same age, which were the opposite. The males were green.
It's like
the females were
perfect
yellow.
chondro shit where it's like you think you're picking up on something and then no,
So
who
it's
knows?
like
That's funny.
I looked at the amount of food, and the ones that were females ate a few more meals. So, you know, I don't know. There's so many compensating factors. I don't think you can put your finger on it.
Sure.
You have to
Yeah.
really look at hundreds of different animals to see what you're coming up with.
It seems like it would make sense though what you're saying, and again that seems to correlate. You know, I've mostly observed it just seemed to be tied into like it's like, oh, that one looked significantly different yesterday, and now there's a huge shit in the tub, and it looks like it went through a significant shift. But I mean that seems to tie in with the chondros and emeralds into the theory of why they change. You know, they're changing as they're changing to rodent prey. They're
Right.
moving higher up and they're turning green. So those increase in prey size maybe is what's triggering that, or at least speeding it up.
Right. And you know,
yeah.
you've got the red babies and the green babies, and you know, emerald. I mean, in emeralds and in chondros, you have the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You get the reds and the yellows. It's like, why are some of them red? You know.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've only had reds and greens born, but I've had more red overall. But I did have quite a few green born this year. But I'm still trying to see how that ends up working out. You know, as far as if it's essentially the same way the yellows and reds work with the chondros.
And you know, I heard Eugene talk about it at the one show he did with MJ without me. He said something that I realized too, and I thought I was the only one. But he's like, I didn't see red tree python babies till, you know, me and Trooper started, you know, breeding larger numbers, and the red ones started popping up. I didn't see red tree pythons till I bred Waminas, which was like in 2008 or 9, something like that.
Okay.
Prior to that, everything was yellow. Everything. And back then, I only had nobody knew where these things came from.
It was just all green tree.
Now I know they were Arus and some were Biocs. But I must not have had a red Bioc, because everything was yellow from the Biocs, and everything from Arus is yellow to begin with anyway.
Yeah.
But as soon as I saw a red baby with those Waminas, I was blown away. I'm like, what the hell is this? Red ones?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
You know? I wish I had those today. They're worth a lot of money.
Yeah, you don't hear too much about the Waminas period, really.
Same with emeralds. The first baby emeralds I had were all green. I never saw red ones.
Oh, weird.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
That was a long time ago. I mean, 80s.
Wow.
And then I remember, say that again?
I would have figured the opposite.
I remembered a wild caught one came from Guyana that my brother and I got. And I'm like, oh, we got to keep this one. It looks grabbing. And it had all red babies. I'm like, what the hell? I thought it was a different species or a different race, you know? Who knows?
Wow.
Yeah, and then there's yellow. There's occasionally yellow babies. I think that's super rare, but there's been a few. I guess that have popped up. I think Tony Nikolai had one or two pop up years ago, and then I think Igor mentioned that he's seen, you know, just a very, very small number of them. So I have no idea what's up with that. I've asked this before, and I expect the answer is still always going to be no. But has there ever been a documented case of a chondro born green?
No, I've never seen it.
I've never heard anything of that. I always just thought it was weird that you see it in emeralds and don't see that in chondros. But be funny if that happened, then all of a sudden people will want green. All of a sudden green will be cool again in the chondro world.
I don't know why people keep knocking the yellow. an adult Biak that's got a lot of yellow on it, to me, is the best thing you're gonna find. I mean,
Yeah, they're dope.
yeah.
I think a lot of it. I mean, I know I joke around. I always just tease. I just try to tease back a little bit because of the yellow jokes. I've tried to push back on designer stuff and red stuff just to screw around. But I think people are coming around to the yellows more now. You got some people like Mark Hager with the designer stuff that's trying to push them too. And I think people are realizing that with the locality animals like Arus and Marukis and Sarongs and everything else, there's, you know, those are some killer animals, the yellow babies.
Nothing better than a
It's just fun to.
with a lot of white, like a white stripe on it.
Yeah, those are badass.
Yeah.
Those are super cool.
The first chondros I ever got to work with, and I was like 13 years old, were high white Marukis, blue
Nice.
bellies, and I'm like, how's it
Hell of a
getting
way to start? Yeah.
That's still my favorite look within chondros to this day. So
Yeah.
And you know,
I think
to
that
me,
and the Arus, you know, that was, you always seem to see those in the magazines and book covers and stuff. That was
Right.
the one that always.
to me, there's a huge difference between a Maruki and an Aru, and a lot of people don't see it. To me, it's just a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
I mean, especially the telltale sign with them are the babies, because the
They
baby
look
Marukis
quite different.
are almost speckled with black almost.
Hmm.
They're lemon yellow with little tiny black dot on every scale. The Arus as babies are lemon yellow with their little patterns, you know,
Right.
but they're yellow. There's no little black dot on every scale. And the little black dot on every scale on the Marukis is so subtle that you need to look really close, you know? And when by the time they're like 3 months old, you can really see the little black speckles. And it's like the coolest phase they have. And then when they change from yellow to green, they look like somebody bleached them, you know? So it's like they have a very specific baby look and a very specific ontogenic change compared to the Arus, where the Arus are really yellow. Then they go from like a yellowish green to green, you know? So
Do you see with the Maruki babies, do you see, I remember, I want to say it was Michael Cermak had posted about this or something years ago, an Australian breeder working with the native Aussies, that when the Aussie babies were born, just, I think it was maybe even just the first few hours out of the egg, or maybe just the first 24 hours, but you could see the stripe. You could like see the actual faint white stripe on them, and then it immediately fades and then doesn't, and then the white kicks in later on. Are you seeing that with the Marukis, or
you can see it looks like the vertebrae, like the peak of the vertebrae. It looks like you can see a stripe on the top.
Yeah.
And then there's a point when they're turning from yellow to green where they'll be yellow with a green stripe. And then that green stripe gets little white specks in it. And as they're turning green, those little white specks seem to spread out a bit. And then if it's going to be a white stripe, it doesn't happen right away. It takes like probably 2 years until you see that white stripe pop through. But yeah, they always have like a vertebral something on them, you know? They're really cool. I mean...
Yeah, those are amazing. Those are still probably my favorites.
Yeah, you know, like I said, people just need to be cognizant and watch and look and get animals from the proper places and, you know what they have. So
yeah, for sure.
And I'm doing the same thing with the chondros that I did with the boas. It's like I have just locality types. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't have any designers. Kenny, you know, I call Kenny Anakin because he went to the dark side. He's got calicos and he's doing the blue stuff and
got some cool stuff though.
Yeah, but I'm not knocking him for it in any way. That's his thing, and you know, I don't want him to be Vin Russo. I want him to be Kenny.
Yeah,
and he's into that stuff, and you know, he really got me back into chondros because I was into it my whole life, and he started with me when he was like 16, and I was in almost at my peak of chondros when he was there. So he was like a kid in the candy store. It was like he tells me now how he was blown away by seeing Waminas and Liras and, you know, Arus and Maruks. But he was very cognizant of the red baby thing. When I like I said to you, I never paid attention to it. The first time I saw reds was when I bred the Waminas, and then I bred an OS animal to a Jayapura and made red ones too. So it's like I never realized or even paid attention to the red ones look different as adults, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I just thought they were all either going to be green or they were going to have a lot of yellow in them, either one, because that's what I predominantly made. But Kenny was the kid who was like, you know, really into, oh, these real red ones are going to be blue, you know? Wait till you see what something red from the Biak looks like if you do two to each other, you know? So he's really into the whole baby thing. And he studies these baby pictures of animals that are mature now that other people have, like designer stuff. And he's got a pretty good idea as to what to look for when you buy in red babies, you know?
Yeah.
to see what they're going to look like as adults, to understand what they might look like as adults. So
that's quite the skill. I mean, I couldn't nearly do that, but I mean, that's, if you study hundreds and, you know, thousands of chondros, inevitably you're going to find some patterns. So that's awesome.
Exactly. And you know, again, you need the eye, like the little things I was telling you about between the Marukis and the Arus. I'll bet you there's nobody else out there that even looks at that. You know what I mean?
I've ever heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like they don't give a shit. You know, they're just like, oh, it's a Maruk. And again, how many people have Marukis that are probably Arus?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah. And I was going to ask that earlier. I mean, truly at this point, how many real Maruki chondros are in the U.S. hobby?
Yeah. And the only reason why I know mine are Marukis because I got them from Cameron. And Cameron I've known since I'm 19.
Yeah.
You know? So he was getting in the real stuff. I got Liras, Waminas from him. Back in the day, I don't have them anymore. I should have kept them. But yeah, I got Arus, Biaks, Sarans, Jayapuras, Cyclops. It all came from Cameron. And they all look very specifically different from each other. And they all have a very specific look to each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like you can tell the difference between, to me, it's a blatant difference between a Jayapura and a Cyclops, even though they're the same species. Huge difference between the two.
Yeah, see, I've still got a lot of sharpening to do with my eyes on some of those localities because I don't pick up on the details as much. There's still a few times that I've seen some Arus and I'm like, is that like a cross between an Aru and a Maruki? Like it kind of looks like it's got some, and maybe that is what it is. Sometimes there's a few that look like that, but then certain animals, it's like, oh, that's clearly a Maruki. Like that doesn't look anything like an Aru. But
once you have them in your hands and you look at them every day, you'll see the differences. You know, even like 30 years ago, I remember telling one of my buddies because I had Biaks and Arus, and he's like, "Oh, why don't you breed one of those to each other?" I'm like, "Because they're different. They don't look anything alike."
Yeah.
And I remember saying to him, "I think they're a completely different race. I mean, the Biaks have a long head, a dragon head with dragon nostrils on the ends, like, you know, Spot in the Addams family. Is it the Addams family? The Munsters, you know, they open the stairs with the dragon with the.
I can't remember it offhand.
They got like a dragon face, and I'm like, the Arus have these little stubby noses with rounded off nostrils. They're a different race, you know. There's something different. And sure as shit, when they started sequencing the DNA on these things, they found out they're different species. How much further apart can you get? I mean, the Arus are all the way in the bottom of the range, and the Biaks are all the way at the top.
I mean, you don't look at a Biak tree monitor and a black tree monitor and think those are the same species. Who would ever do that? Like, so why would it be any different from chondros? Or look at a Biak and an Aru scrub python. They look nothing alike. Even their body structure is different. So why would this one species be the same when everything else is so different. And I think a lot of it comes down to people just don't know the geography of that region.
Right.
You know, if you really like look at the map, you're like, oh, I just been saying all these names for so long, I didn't even know where these towns, or islands were. And when you actually look at the map, you're like, okay, this all makes a little bit more sense to me now. So
yeah, and you think of like Kafayu, which was the most distinctly different. You look at where they come from, it's as far west as you can go on the range of tree python. There's nothing west of them. You know, they're at the end of their range, and they are completely different than whatever is east of them. You know? So
And then
like,
do you know? Oh, go ahead.
You just got to know your geography.
yeah.
And with those as well, they all seem to have that strange, like extra long ontogenesis, or what, you know, where it just seems to take a lot longer, and then it's also almost a little bit different of behavior, and that does. It seems like a lot of people have said, well, you know, it was mostly yellow, it was staying yellow, seemed to be, you know, going to stay yellow, and then all of a sudden I move it to a larger cage or a different cage. You know, when it's 5, 6, 7 years old or something, and then now it shifts to green or like a kind of lime green, and it's kind of interesting. You don't seem to see that with any of the other ones, at least not that I'm aware of. Maybe that does happen with some other localities, but
yeah, it's like there's something on that island that is that color, that they stay that color. You know, it's like Key Island. I used to breed the Key Island skinks. They're really yellow and silver.
Yeah, they're really unique.
And you look at the scrubs from Key Island, they're yellow and silver. The same color. The same exact color. It's like, what's there that they makes them that color? I've never been there, so I don't know.
Yeah.
And there's even I don't think Key Island's part of the Moluccans. I think it's just on the eastern end of the Moluccans, right?
Yeah. No, I think some try to claim it is, but no, it's not. It's
right.
To me, it's a kind of a sister island off of Aru, essentially.
Right. But you know, the further west you go to the Moluccas, then you get those chartreuse yellow Moluccan scrubs that are just like blow you away. It's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. The Key Island scrubs are essentially like take an Aru scrub body and superimpose Moluccan scrub colors. And that's
right. Right.
I mean, I have a Key Island scrub in my collection, and it is just, it's incredible. It's an amazing snake, but physiologically, nothing like a Moluccan scrub. Couldn't be more different. Right. Almost identical to an Aru scrub. So, okay. So I guess Lisa is helping on some of the technical aspects. It's part of the Maluku Regency, so that might be why there's some confusion. So from a legal standpoint, it's part of the Moluccas, but from a geographic and species
evolutionary
standpoint, it's pretty far separate. So
right.
I think if I have it my map right, even Tannenbar is in between like Saram and Key. So just look at that.
Yeah.
You have these two very similar scrub pythons, but this couldn't be any more different scrub python directly in the middle.
Right.
So, but
yeah. Well, they've evolved genetically isolated.
Yeah.
So they change.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll bet you if somebody did some serious DNA sequencing on everything from around there, they'd find multiple species.
Yeah, 100%.
Have they done? It's not my thing. Have they done a lot of DNA sequencing at all on those animals?
Nothing major has been published yet.
Okay.
So, yeah, as of right now, still the whole Amethystina complex is still one thing where everything else, be it blue tongues or tree monitors or green tree pythons, you know, they've all been essentially following the same general principles. So there's no reason to think that scrubs might not do the same thing.
Right. Yeah, I'll bet they'll find multiple species.
Yeah, more than likely so. And I think it'll also be good to like deter some hybridization, crossing and stuff like that, where people could justify this is a locality cross, and it's like harder to justify a species hybrid, even though nothing changed from last year to this year except for a scientific name, but
Right.
hopefully that goes that way. So, but yeah, no, they're, and then like inevitably the scrub pythons we don't even know about yet. Even like in the Malukus, there's so many islands like Obi Island. Everything else comes from there. Why the hell not a scrub python? What does that look like? Does it look like a Halmahera? Does it look more like a Clastolepis? I don't know, but or like Ternate, where there's retics, there's everything else you got. Why not a scrub python there the way there is on Halmahera? Like just based on geography, there has to be something there. There's no way there isn't. So
Right.
I don't know, stuff like that really gets me excited about it.
You're gonna have to go there and look.
I do have to go there and look.
That's the harsh reality with some of this stuff. Is it's like that's the only way you're gonna ever find out, probably, or at least ever have a chance.
I'm willing to be that guy. Yeah, no, to me, like, you know, I've been keeping them for long enough where I'm like, at some point I gotta find something in the wild. Like I gotta do, you know, like how much progress can I make without having real knowledge of what these things actually are living like and whatnot. So
you have to go there. That was one of the major things I set my mind to when I first started breeding boas. It's like I have to go where they live.
Yeah.
I went to multiple places. I'm like, I'm gonna go. I went to Costa Rica. I went to Panama, Nicaragua. I went to then another trip. I went to Ecuador, Peru. I wanted to see them in the wild. I wanted to see the environment they lived in and how they lived there and what it felt like with the temperature. I brought thermometers, hygrometers.
Yeah.
I needed to know, you know, just to get an idea. Like, are my assumptions right, you know? And I was pretty wrong. I thought it was a lot warmer than it was, you know, and it was a nice awakening for me to figure things out.
Oh yeah, I've had that same experience with my rattlesnakes. I mean, I've essentially moved to their habitat, and you know, being out in the mountains in the spring, camping, and you know, you wake up at 4 a.m. and you're like, I feel like I'm in a refrigerator right now. This is insane. Yeah. Like these snakes are actually living here. Like, it gives you a great perspective. You know, like we're not even looking for anything until hours until after the sun come up. It's like there's just no purpose. So why blast the thing with a hotspot? It's at 8 a.m. in captivity. It'll never happen at almost any point in the year except for like the peak of the summer. So yeah, I mean, for me that made a world of a difference in understanding those snakes, and can only imagine for scrub pythons it would be even more extreme for me than that. So yeah, it's I feel like next year that's like one of my main life goals. Either Australia or Indo, preferably Indo, but I wouldn't complain with Australia either. Just get boots on the ground and, you know, find something in the wild.
I went to Australia in '96 for a couple of weeks, and I got to tell you, the largest green tree python I've seen in my life was an Australian green tree python. And I thought, oh, they have the largest race. You know, then other people say, no, that they don't really get that big. But I'm like, the one I saw was really big.
Yeah.
So, but it could have just been one larger. It was at a crocodile farm. They had a couple of them there, and I was blown away at how big that, compared to what I had seen back at home. I was just like, wow. Yeah. And they also had a couple of babies that were still yellow that were the size of my like yearlings that were green already, you know?
Okay.
So I just thought, well, the Australian ones are bigger, you know?
Yeah. Like how big was that animal?
You know, it's so long ago. I obviously didn't take it out and measure it, but it was far bigger than the stuff I had. And I had some stuff that was pretty big back then. I had a couple of Maruks that were pretty big, and a couple of Arus. I had a Biak that was pretty big too back then. So I just was like, wow, these are a lot bigger than what I've got at home, you know?
Yeah. We got a question again from Lisa. So have you ever seen Sigma in the wild?
I personally have not been to Sonora myself.
Okay.
Have you ever seen any emeralds in the wild or no?
when I was in Ecuador, there was something way up high
Oh, nice.
that we couldn't
They have some. I've seen some gorgeous animals.
get to it, and it was. I'm not gonna. It was definitely not. It was hard to tell what it was because it was similar to northerns, but it kind of looked like a basin also.
Well, because isn't that kind of right in the range between northerns and basins, and where there may be a third species of emerald?
I'll bet you there's a third species over there, and that again, nothing really comes out of that part of the world.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that. You're not the first person to say that, and it seems to make sense. And they do. Those a lot of the ones, if you look on iNaturalist, and even random stuff I've seen posted on Instagram from people in those areas, they tend to look almost like some of the 50-50 crosses, even though they're probably not necessarily intergrades or anything, but they have that kind of look to them where they look in between, and people will argue over whether it's a caninus or a Batesi, but yeah, those are gorgeous animals from that region.
And it had the color of a basin, but the markings looked like a northern.
Yeah.
It was far away, so I couldn't get a good shot of it.
I feel like a factor with that animal, and obviously you wouldn't have seen it so far away, but would be the head scalation.
Right.
Like if it has more of a northern or more of a basin head scalation, I think that would be an interesting tell as to exactly what that is.
Yeah, and that's a weird one thing too, because I have a couple of wild caught ones that have head scalation. I think we talked about this a little bit, where the head scalation looks closer to a basin, not exact, but it looks closer to that than any of the northerns that I have. And a couple of them that they kind of a little bit, not really, but they almost have a little bit of a different color and even pattern shape to them that's a little bit more reminiscent of a basin, but much darker, not quite the same coloration overall.
But going back to that question the person asked about the Tarumara and Sonora, did they ask how cold it gets there?
Yeah, Lisa asked. Yeah, she said she imagines that it gets pretty cold for those guys out there.
It does get cold there, but here's the thing: people think just because it gets cold there that they should keep their Tarahumara or their Sonora boa cold.
Mm.
And when we talk about people keep animals too hot, just because it gets 45, 50 degrees where they come from doesn't mean you lower them to 45 or 50 degrees, because where they come from, they're hiding underground.
Yeah.
They're hiding in a stump. They're hiding in a hollow tree. They're hiding under a rock that could be conserving heat. And they are conserving heat. They're bunching up and conserving heat, So just because I know in Sonora they've recorded temperatures close to freezing. I know they have.
For sure.
And I know there's boas there, but the boas aren't sitting out on a rock at 40 degrees. They're nowhere to be found conserving heat.
Yeah,
maybe under a rock or in a hollow stump, waiting for the morning to come where they can bask. So
that's to say, then like what we talked about earlier, then they're waiting for that opportunity to charge up.
So can they handle being kept at 40 degrees? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, like the indigo snakes that are from Sonora, you keep them like that, you're not gonna have an indigo snake very long.
Right.
Like, it's just not gonna work. There's microclimates that we aren't able to replicate that these animals clearly have a niche for out there, and
exactly.
Like kill your animal.
A friend of mine's been to Tamaulipas, and he says it gets to freezing in Tamaulipas, and I have boas from Tamaulipas.
Those are awesome.
Now they come from like the cloud forests.
Yeah.
Now in the city it might get that temperature, and the cloud forest does it. It probably doesn't. It might. I don't know. But again, the boas aren't sitting cooling down to 32 degrees. They're conserving heat somewhere. So, and I've never cooled my Tamaulipas boas lower than high 60s, and they still reproduce and have babies, and they're fine. So
yeah,
that seems to be a good kind of safe low limit. Is that high 60s, low 70s range?
Yeah, that's like they're gonna find that in nature, And again, if a snake is, for example, if you've got a larger boa and it's sucked up heat during the day, it takes a really long time for that snake to cool down at night, even if you kept it at 68 degrees.
Yeah.
You know, I would have that problem with the bigger Surinams and the Peru boas. They wouldn't cool down because they're conserving the heat, you know, and they're wrapped up tight, and you put a temperature gun on them in the middle of the night and they're 75 degrees and the air temperature is like 68. So
yeah, all things people got to think about. You know, you can't just look at you can't just, you know, go on your weather app and type in this city and be like, all right, I got my plan now. So
all right, I got my Tarumara boa and it gets down to 47 degrees there in February, so I'm going to keep them at 47.
Yeah.
I had a question with regards to like the early days of establishing some of these different boas. What kind of challenges did you run into with dealing with the groups of wild caught ones in terms of like illnesses and failure to thrive and that kind of thing? Because I remember back in the day, it seemed like the boas were almost as notorious, maybe not as notorious as the emeralds, as having the chronic regurg stuff kicking in. But it seems like the efforts people made, and so I was curious to hear from you on this, have pretty much, you know, all but eliminated that as far as the captive lines. What was that like back then? And you know, did you have any projects where it was just like, oh man, I couldn't get a particular line to go, or you couldn't get a particular, you know, locality or something established and was lost due to anything like that?
Well, I know for a fact that regurg syndrome with the emeralds and like the Surinams and Guyanas was from keeping them too hot and dry. It was that simple. And back then we kept everything too hot and dry. So I realized pretty early on that the best way I would keep all those things was I would put them in a 28-quart Rubbermaid rack. We made them out of Formica back then, which is I used for furniture. I made my own racks because I was also a carpenter when I was younger. So I would make these racks with heat tape in the back, and they were melamine, melamine, is that what they call it? Formica with melamine on them. And I'd get the 28-quart Rubbermaids from like Kmart or something and drill holes in the front and put them in, put either mulch or sphagnum moss. And even if the snake was like 5 or 6 feet, I would put them in those smaller Rubbermaids. Even emeralds, I wouldn't even put a perch in there. I just let them sit. And they'd pick if they wanted to sit in the back or sit in the front. And keep them at 100% humidity or 95%.
Yeah.
In a hot spot of like 90, I guess. And the rooms that I kept my stuff in were like 82. And I would leave a little bowl with rat crawlers alive overnight. I wouldn't want to feed them with tongs and have them see me because they would get pissed off and start striking. So I would leave the rat pups, and they would eat them always overnight. And I would put Panicure on the rat pups and Strongid, which is like a yellow paste, and sometimes metronidazole, just to get rid of protozoans, get rid of worms and parasites.
Sorry, this rabbit's being a pain in the ass. She's getting it. Rambuck's just gonna kick her off the couch.
My wife has rabbits. I breed rabbits too for snake. And they usually would do pretty well that way. And you didn't want them to see you, so you'd like black out the front and just leave them for weeks and weeks that way until you saw they shed a few times. That's what Gus and I did with the first Pokegrons that came in 2000. Okay. He was like, you know, you have a good recipe for him, and I gave him that same recipe, and he did it with his, and they all did pretty well. He eventually bred those. I ended up breeding Guyanas that way. Northern Emeralds I did that way. The first Longicarda I had to do that with, they were parasite ridden and they were really thin. You know, they looked like they were dragged out of a swamp and then dried out, because they had like mud all over.
And then they
them.
were confiscated too, right? Was that the? Were
Well,
those the ones
that's
that
how
were
I got them.
Yeah.
When they came out of the wild, they were confiscated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they ended up going to the zoo, and the zoo didn't want them. So I knew a guy at the zoo, and he's like, "Hey, Vin, you want any of these things?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll take them." So they looked like they were covered in mud. I also got, what else did I get back then? I got some Peru boas that way. The first Sabagay I got came out of the wild from Cameron. He knew Quetzal went to Pearl Islands and got some back for under permits for a zoo. I got in a lot of everything I had pretty much originally was wild caught, almost everything, pretty much. And I can honestly say that if you keep them 100% humidity with a hot spot, they live. I made some mistakes with emeralds where I was keeping them in fish tanks with screen covers. They would eat and then they puke up, but they were too hot and dry. Mm-hmm. I put a heat lamp on them. But that was like in the 80s. That's all we had back then.
Sure.
So luckily I don't think I lost anything that was valuable to say, oh, I'll never get those again. So
yeah, that's good then.
Yeah, that ninja feeding approach. I did. That's what I've done to get all the wild caught ones that I've bought to feed. Is the same kind of thing. It's really crucial. I've noticed that if you with some of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, if they see you, they're not going to feed. They're
right.
like they don't want anything. They just immediately get defensive. So I always joked and kind of called it ninja feeding. But what I would do is I do feed them off tongs, but I'd unlatch the lid of the tub, probably 20 minutes before I'm planning to feed it. So I just get that step out of the way. So I disturb them and then they chill out a little bit, and then I click the light out and then use a long grabber tool to just kind of lift the lid and then offer the prey item to them, and they'll take frozen thawed 9 times out of 10 like that if they don't see me.
Right.
But if they see me, then half the time then they're immediately just focused on me, and then they're just defensive and they're too stressed out and they're not going to take it.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. Where they come from, if they see a primate, it's a monkey that's trying to eat them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they know that you're not going to help them.
Yeah, they're not taking a chance. They're not taking any chances.
You're going to try to eat them, or you're trying to catch them or hurt them or whatever. So they've evolved that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, shoot, we were joking before the podcast about time, and was like, well, Chris and I have done 3.5 hours. We're definitely not going to do all of that. Chris, do you have anything else you want to hit on before we wrap up here?
Let me see. So there's too much to go through for just this one episode, but I know there was a couple different things. Let me pick one here. Oh, this is one. So, because you've had so much experience breeding multi generations, you've always hear a lot of talk about like feed response being something that's inherited, and passed on. So it's like selecting the best feeding parents, whatever individuals had a great feed response and were basically easy to start. Those are the ones you want to breed together because they're going to pass those on to the babies. Do you see like concrete evidence of that to where it's pretty undeniable in your opinion, or is it more so sometimes that your feeding techniques and your kind of your experience just makes it easier to start these babies?
It depends on the species too, because like I've talked about before on MJ's show, like tree pythons. Mm-hmm. Some of them just want a gecko or a skink. So it's like, is their feeding response really good on a gecko?
Yeah.
That means they'll be fine. I mean, think about this for a second. Every single boa and python in the wild did not eat a pinky mouse as his first meal.
No.
So they all ate most likely a gecko.
Yeah.
Or a skink, or even a tree frog, or a knoll. But so I don't really go by that, because a lot of the tree pythons that I've raised in the past, when I couldn't get house geckos, I would get leopard geckos. I would feed them leopard geckos. And as far as boas, you know, all of the island races will eat a small hopper mouse at birth. They're opportunistic feeders. They'll eat anything pretty much. So I've never had issues with them. But with the tree pythons and the tree boas, you know, they want something different. So I would just give it to them. It was great that when Kenny came up with the crested geckos, because years ago he had a snake that wouldn't eat. And he's like, "It won't eat. I don't know what to do." And I'm like, "You got baby crested geckos?" Because I knew he had crested geckos. Like, yeah, I'm like, just throw it in there. It'll eat it. And sure enough, it did. And he was like blown away by that. I'm like, "Why are you blown away? That's the little gecko. That's what they eat."
Yeah.
You know? So I don't go by that as far as genetics. I think they're all born with the ability to eat something.
Mm-hmm.
Just a matter of finding it and letting them get it, you know.
That's kind of what I've thought a lot about too. Is it's like I don't know what it is exactly about certain individuals and why some of them seem to just respond to, you know, almost anything you put in front of them.
Right.
They're just like, oh, I'll grab whatever. I even wonder sometimes if it could be argued that isn't necessarily always advantageous. It's advantageous for us in captivity, but in the wild, maybe this thing's going to go, you know, throw itself trying to take a meal that it's going to regret and get killed in the process. But yeah, I wondered about that. It's good to hear your opinion on that, because that's kind of my thoughts too on it. Is just it's like we're not really offering them what they would actually eat in the wild. Yeah, I don't know if it's a great real measurement to say, well, this one's more inclined to take it, so that means it's going to pass it on to the babies. I've just always, you know, it always felt like it's been anecdotal at best.
Right. Yeah, and like Stephen with the scrubs, they're really not eating mice at birth. You know.
Right. Yeah.
They're most likely eating geckos and skinks too. So
right.
It might be a good idea to breed some kind of gecko or skink.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we just got some quail to start to, you know, breed some other fun stuff. So maybe the next adventure is, you know, some crested geckos or something like that. Yeah. It seems like about 10 to 15% of my babies are just, they don't want anything to do with a rodent. Mm-hmm. Like a good amount of them, probably half of them will take it on the first go. The next, you know, 25, 30% will take it within the first 4 or 5 feedings. And then some of them are just like, I'll go 2 years without eating for you. I don't fucking care.
Right.
And you can kind of see it's like they just don't recognize. It's like they don't see this as food. They're just like, look at it kind of confused, or they're just extremely timid and they're just shut down from anything you're offering. You know,
with them, what's weird is that like they won't strike at anything.
Yeah.
These babies that are the stubborn feeders, like I could go there and poke them on the opening of their mouth for 5 minutes straight, and they would not bite me. So,
and you know what else happens too with a lot of those baby snakes? They don't like being out in the open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, like, I would set them up in tall jars,
mm-hmm.
you know, with pothos plants in them and little sticks, and leave a gecko in there overnight. They'd eat it overnight. You'd never see them eat it.
Yeah, sure.
It would be gone in the morning. So those I would just mark on their little glass jar, gecko, and put the date. And then a week later, do it again. And get to the point where they go into a shed and they feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
And then you can try like a little, like a peach fuzz rodent, a mouse.
Yeah.
And then usually once their metabolism kicks in, they are looking for food then. You know? And it's the motion that gets them looking. They're like, zoop, zoop, they focus in on things. So,
yeah.
Again, it's just patience and, you know.
Patience and trying different stuff too, because some individuals will respond better to certain types of movement even. You know, I'm trying to always get better about that and recognizing, like, if I'm sitting here dicking around with a baby emerald or a chondro that's not feeding, I try to remind myself, well, how am I approaching this one? If I keep coming at it aggressively and it's not responding to that, well, try going really calm, try being light with it, you know, just those kind of techniques to see what's going to get that individual to actually respond.
And you know, I'm not an advocate at all of force feeding anything. I think if you start shoving things down their throat, you're gonna hurt something, and it might mess up, you know, a muscle or a nerve that they use in there to swallow. To me, that's like, again, it's just my opinion. I know a lot of guys do it.
Yeah.
I'm not shoving anything down their throat. If they're not eating it, then you know they're not meant to be, or they'll eat a gecko. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
One thing tied into that, and then if we want to wrap up, because I could keep rambling and rambling here, but I remember I think it was Kenny mentioned this to me at one point in a message, and I or maybe you as well have brought it up, but the idea of live prey versus frozen thawed for the babies to help kind of strengthen them and harden them. Do you think that's pretty crucial for them to get a couple of meals live or fresh killed?
They need, again, it's my opinion, they need the living bacteria from the prey item.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Makes a lot of sense to me.
They need the living bacteria and pathogens that are in that prey item to inoculate their bodies with living digestible bacteria.
Yeah.
So it's like a human eating yogurt to get better bacteria into their gut, you know?
Yeah.
And here's the weird thing. I've heard people say you got to give them yogurt. Have you heard that? People putting yogurt on pinkies for chondros. They're not mammals. They don't need. I'm only using the word yogurt because there's living bacteria in yogurt for humans. It has nothing to do with reptiles. The living bacteria that reptiles need is in the form of a living prey item, whether it's a mammal or a reptile food item.
Yeah.
So I'm a true believer in that. And I breed my own mice and rats. And every baby in the building gets started on live little mice hoppers or mice pinkies, or rat pinkies, whatever it is. And they're fed that for the first, few months of their life. And then they start eating defrosted after that, and they're done. But they need that inoculation.
Do you think, is it pretty easy to get those animals to switch when you do it that way?
Yeah, everything will eat once
they're hardened, basically.
Yeah, once they're hardened off, and like you said, they're on autopilot then.
Yeah.
To me, they're bulletproof. They'll eat anything. They'll eat your finger at that point. You know? So you just.
I've had a couple of. I've had this with the emerald so far. I've had a few of them. Thankfully, not too many, but it feels like I get one out of every litter that is just, it's like fixated on live. It doesn't want anything to do with a frozen thawed meal. And it might take them a full year or even sometimes longer before then finally that switch goes off in their brain, and then they'll take it. And I wish I understood, is there something I'm doing wrong here, or what's making that particular individual that picky like that, or that specific. It seems to be the motion. They don't seem, with the emeralds at least, they don't really seem to give much of a shit about the scent. At least in my experience. And I haven't tried lizards with them, but it seems to be that at some point they stop fixating so much on the motion of a live rodent, and then they'll take, from the tongs.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
I just don't understand why.
I have some island boas that are like that too. They like live stuff, and some Nicaraguan boas too. They like live stuff for the first couple months, and then eventually they'll eat anything. But every one of them switches over. It's not like they're stuck.
Yeah, eventually at some point.
Yeah.
I'm always curious at what is it, because I haven't been able to pinpoint what got this one to finally switch. It just seems like at some point it's like they come online almost. Like they've just been this out in the ether somewhere, and they come online like, oh yeah, this is food too. Let me grab that.
Right.
But
and I've noticed too that you need to breed multiple species of rodents. So I breed soft birds, I breed mice, and I breed rats. Baby chondros love the baby soft furred rat. A little tiny pinky that's just starting to get like little fuzz on it. It kind of looks like a little baby bird almost when they're at a certain stage. They love those. I don't know why. They don't live in Africa, but they love an African mouse. So if one won't eat a pinky, I try the African softbird. 1 year I had a baby chondro that only would eat rat pups. The rat pup's a lot bigger, so I would cut them in half. It would eat half a rat pup, but it ate them. It was like stuck on rat pups.
Yeah.
You know, so it depends on what gets stuck in their head as to a smell maybe that they want.
Yeah.
And I think if they're stuck on a live item, I think it's the heat signature that they're stuck to. So you might want to try heating up.
Yeah, sometimes that does work. That's usually what ends up eventually getting them, is this you offer it to them extra hot and then they'll finally go for it. But I still have had a couple that are just real weird like that. I've got, occasionally I'll have one that is pretty fixated on only mice, and then in order to get it to take a rat, like I have one right now that if I present it just a frozen thawed rat pup, it'll just look at it like it's excited, but then it just looks at me kind of and looks at the rat like I'm not sure what to do here. Right. And I could just literally take a little fluff of mouse fur, put it right on the snout, and then reoffer it, slams it immediately. Yeah. As soon as it just gets a tiny little, sense of that fur of the mouse that it recognizes, and then it goes for it. So it's always weird, but hang on, get out of here, quit bothering. She wants attention. It's driving me nuts.
Oh, she's like, you've been gone for 4 hours, Dad. What the fuck?
She just wants to be annoying is all. But I mean, I've got much more stuff, but it's we're at 3:40, so we could just do it another time.
All right.
Yeah, I just checked, and yeah, we've officially set the record on here for longest podcast, at least that I've done. Probably that MJ's done in a long time. So definitely,
it's been fun. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, really, I've loved this. Yeah, Vin, thank you so much for all of your time tonight. This
really appreciate it.
Sure.
Conversation. I mean, we still have people. We have 41 people right now, almost at hour 4, who are tuned in. So, wow. and people who've been in the comments since the beginning of the episode. So people have been here the entire time. Which props to everyone who's been here throughout this evening. So I guess as we wrap up, then, if anyone listening or watching wants to follow what you're doing, keep up with your availability, where can they find you online?
cuttingedgeherp.com is my website. My Instagram is also cuttingedgeherp.
Okay.
And my Facebook page is cuttingedgeherp too. So
cool. And then you have your availabilities on your website?
I usually, what I do as far as availability, I will post on Instagram saying, I have some blood boas that I'll be posting the MORPH market soon. So I have a MORPH market page.
Okay.
So I'll do that every week. I try to post like 4 or 5 animals that I'll put on there. And if people want something, they usually just inquire about it. I don't have a list, so to speak.
Yeah.
But if they're interested in something, usually they inquire, and I let them know if I have them or not, which is fine.
Yeah.
I do that constantly.
Cool. All right. Chris, now how about you? Shout out where everyone can find you.
I'm pretty much, I do respond sometimes on Facebook, but I'm pretty bad about it. So Instagram's usually the best. Right now that's still, snake.spirit is the account name on there. And as far as availability, it's just best to reach out to me through there, usually through Instagram. A lot of people think I never let any emeralds go, but that's not true. I let them go in little batches here and there. So I'll have some more ready. Pretty much ready.
You're like an emerald hoarder.
I have been. I have been, and it's gotten to the point now to where I'm just like, okay, there's no effing way I can keep this many of them. It really sucks to have to make these decisions on which ones to let go of, though, because it's like I want to keep all of them, and I just can't. So,
do you have any of those high white ones that were originated with Rico way back when? Do you know where?
No, I don't have any of the Miss Willie line. No, I don't have any of those. There's a few people with that bloodline around still. Which is cool to see that sustained, and that's the thing. Those are not only even here in the U.S., but they're in Europe as well.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of high white lines that I'm working on my own, but no Miss Willie yet. But I want to add those into what I'm doing as well. So yeah, but this past season was a lot of anaconda face. So
Yeah. Well, if you work on the high white, that's what I want. So
yeah,
let me know.
definitely.
Oh yeah, cool. Well, for myself, just as we wrap up, I'm on Instagram, Scrub Shepherd, Stephen Kush, Facebook. I'm on here every Wednesday. Got a YouTube as well at Kush Reptile on YouTube. Same thing on Morph Market. So that's where you guys can find me. Thank you guys both again for your time tonight. This was an incredible conversation. I got a lot out of it. I know all the listeners will get a ton out of it as well. And yeah, this is definitely one for the book. So thank you guys from the bottom of my heart.
All right, guys.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Sure.
great show, man. Appreciate everyone's time.
All right,
Okay.
guys.
All right. So with all that said, take care, everybody. We'll see you back here next week for a new episode.